Hey, what's going on, everybody? How are you doing? Happy Sunday, chat, wherever you may be, or if you're already starting your Monday, hope you're having a cup of coffee and enjoying your Monday. We are going to do another go no go poll tonight. Essentially, that's our name, if you will, for our space news segment. And we're going to be focusing on two things. Our go news for tonight is, of course, Polaris Dawn. SpaceX is gearing up for another crew mission, this one all done for a private commercial space flight. Yo!
Nothing wrong.
Oi.
You're just haters. Butch and Sonny would have been fine-eyed Quayala so pressed like sheesh, give me a fucking break. God. Like I'm going to land in White Sands flawlessly and Yala going to still be like he's not safe.
Starliner starting the stream off on a great note, giving us a $2.50 tip. Much appreciated, Starliner. Don't worry, I fully back you. It's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate where you are right now, Starliner, but we're going to get into that and talk about it. We're going to watch NASA's press conference that was held yesterday, where they actually told us face to face with Bill Nelson the actual decision to keep Starliner on board, and then actually detaching Starliner and returning it down to White Sands, as was mentioned, without any crew members. That's right, Starliner is going to leave the International Space Station here and make room, of course, for the Crew 9 Dragon capsule that's got to come up, and that's not going to have Butch and Sonny on board. So we're going to talk through that and all that jazz. I can't believe Starliner watches the stream. I know, it's wild, right? Thank you, RJ. Much love to you. What's up, Obama? How are you? But anyways, chat, that's what we're going to do. So what do you guys say we kick over into our go, no go poll space news segment? Fancy transition. Check. What's up, Stealthy? How are you? And they can spare some money. Yeah. Anyways, chat, like I said, it's going to be pretty brief tonight. We just have a couple things here that we got to go over. First and foremost, we're going to go through our go news fairly quickly. It's not a lot, unfortunately, with the way things have gone tonight. And then in the and then in the focus of tonight is going to be our no-go news, which is going to be all about Starliner, and if we have time, depending on where we are, we'll also talk about Rocket Factory Osberg, who recently came out with a super transparent, the complete opposite of NASA Starliner or NASA Boeing, fully transparent as to what happened on their flight hardware. Basically the stage that was designed or was intended to actually go up on their first flight later this year exploded on the test stand. They had a really great video come out and explain everything. So also we might look into that depending on just how down in the weeds we get with Starliner. It really was superb misadventures, and you know, they didn't, I think, really give us like the exact cause. They gave us the essentially the effect of what we see. The effect that we saw, right, was there was apparently a oxygen fire in the oxygen pre-burner on their engines, and that caused that, or in the turbo pump, I should say, in the oxygen oxidizer turbo pump, and that led to that massive flamethrower that we got to see on the launch pad that we covered here a couple weeks ago. Yeah, not good, not what you want. So they had something that sparked the fire in their turbopump machinery, and then that just caused a horrible chain effect. What exploded there? I believe was it their first stage, chat? It was the actual flight hardware for their flight that was scheduled for later this year, and now because it exploded on the launch stand, that actual flight unit, they are going to have to rebuild it, and they're pushing their first flight to 2025, which is unfortunate, but like I said, it was a great video. We'll watch it if we can. Alrighty then, chat. So first things first, yeah, blam. Let's go through our upcoming launch schedule. The fire was coming out of the wrong place. Yeah, so for Rocket Factory Osberg, They had their test stand right, and the first stage engines were pointing down, but a big, massive fire was shooting out this way. So pointing this way, flamey end down, but flamey end was actually sideways. Not great. You don't want that. So, but anyways, let's look at our launch lineup here for this upcoming week. And man, is it a doozy. Everything happening on Tuesday, chat. We'll actually see what sticks, because SpaceX has had back-to-back Starlink missions scheduled before, and they usually slip one to like the following day. But we do currently have one Starlink group heading out of Cape Canaveral from Slick 40, and then we also have, of course, another one scheduled at 12:33 just behind that out of Vandenberg. But then we also have Polaris Dawn currently scheduled for August 27th, so I'm pretty sure this one is going to be canceled, just because you have a human rated flight, a crew mission happening only an hour later. So I'm pretty sure this one is going to get scrubbed, but it's still on all of the launch schedules that I can currently see. So we have this at 12:17, this at 12:33, and then this at 1:38. Those are all Mountain Time. Check that. So yeah, like I said, mostly this one's going to get, most likely this one will be scrubbed. This one may be scrubbed also for Polaris Dawn, but that remains to be seen. The other thing that should be good is we do, in fact, have another New Shepard launch scheduled. Decided not to cover it tonight, but we did hear earlier this week, or like just the last couple of days or something like that, that New Shepard completed their parachute anomaly review. Basically, they led an investigation because their NS-25 mission, their return to flight, one of the capsule parachutes failed to unreef. So if you guys know, have seen basically any vehicle that has large parachutes, any capsule, Dragon the same, basically the parachutes, when they deploy, right, the main parachutes deploy, they usually stay cuffed at the very bottom instead of being able to fan out all the way. They usually are basically held at a really tight radius on the initial deployment, in order to allow the parachutes to unfurl and to also reduce the basically the loads. If you have in KSP, for example, all of your parachutes deploy and come under full drag, you could really hurt something. So they usually stay reefed. That allows the parachute to start filling up and creating more drag on the vehicle to slow the vehicle down more. And then you basically have a reefing line that gets cut at the very bottom that then allows the entire radius of the parachute to deploy. Well, one of those reefing cutting systems failed on the NS-25 mission. It's totally fine. The capsule is designed to land under 2 parachutes just fine, and it did so, but they had to do an investigation. And now we just heard that New Shepard 26 is scheduled for Thursday, the 29th. Yep, another New Shepard, which should be good. They moved 9.5 even further back, indeed. So yeah, also, of course, depending on what happens to these Starlink missions, like I said, one of them at least is probably going to be scrubbed. This one might also be scrubbed. We have Polaris Dawn, a crew mission, that takes precedence. We also have a Starlink schedule for Friday, August 30th at 11:39 p.m. Mountain Time. And then that takes us into pretty much September, unless they can get NROL 113 out in August. But yeah, then September is going to be huge as well, chat. Mainly because we have Vega's return to flight. We have another H2A from JAXA being launched. We have a Vulcan certification flight number 2 is expected to be launched in September as well. There's a lot. There's really a lot happening. We have another Electron. Fantastic things happening in the next couple months. But Polaris Dawn, chat, is where it's going to be. Maybe SLC and LC far enough apart to allow both to launch. I have no idea, because it's also like a safety thing, right? Like Vandenberg, I can see sticking depending on if SpaceX wants to operate both. But again, a crew mission takes precedence. It has its own operators' rights. I don't know if they're going to want to necessarily do both. And then, of course, this one at Slick 40, being right down the road and only an hour separation between launch, you're not going to launch your vehicle because they're going to basically be in the crew capsule an hour away. So like, there's no way that that's going to work out, I don't think. New Glenn, yes, New Glenn should also be happening at some point later this year. Is it supposed to happen in September? Yeah, that's right. net October. So yeah, we still have the Escapade mission, the demonstration flight of New Glenn, basically happening later this year, and hopefully that launch date sticks. We'll see. The Galileo mission will be the end of booster 1067. Interesting. So this one right here, the end of booster 1067. What's the number on 1067? Oh wait, they don't. Oh, unknown vehicle. So this hasn't updated yet. Gotcha. What's 1067 in terms of their number of flights? The Escapade stats will have so much room for activities in the fairing. Yeah, don't forget, New Glenn is a 7-meter core, right? So a 7-meter diameter fairing, and it's essentially launching CubeSats, something the size of like a small mini fridge, you know, like, or like a desktop size system, like a desktop computer size system. So yeah, they're very, very tiny sats in a very large vehicle, but you know, what are you gonna do, right? It's a fantastic first flight, if you ask me. But yes, the Escapade, the Escape and Plasma Acceleration Dynamic Explorers, total mass 180 kilograms. Indeed. Not too shabby, chat, not too shabby. But, so getting back into Polaris Dawn, the 22nd mission for the Galileo flight, huh? That's crazy, 22. Nice. So we did get this news here. This is coming from Ben Cooper on X. We had a successful static fire occurring here. This is the booster and the Dragon capsule that is going to be flying for the Polaris Dawn mission. Fantastic shots here coming from the tower during the actual static fire. Ben Cooper has another one from the ground. Absolutely fantastic. You can see that they have the bridge here folded back, basically retracted, allowing for the static fire, but absolutely great shots. The amount of room they will have in the fairing. Yep, see, there you go, chat. Yep, that's nice. Heck yeah. Well, there you go, chat. Like I said, they're small sats. They're only like what, like 80 kilograms a piece or something like that. And yeah, very, very large, so much room for activities inside the New Glenn fairing. But yeah, so we have fantastic shots here in preparation for the Polaris Dawn mission. Not only that, but we also have the crew looking up at their ride into low Earth orbit. So this flight is going to have 4 crew members. Polaris Dawn is the first of 3 fully privately funded space exploration missions into low Earth orbit. They have Polaris Dawn. They have another one that they're looking to do the first polar orbit around Earth. Really good stuff. They're actually also going to not only be doing the first commercially led EVA, extra vehicular activity. They're actually going to be going outside of the Dragon capsule. I'll show you a concept picture of that here momentarily. But this particular mission, Polaris Dawn, is also going to be exploring, or I should say, reviewing and gathering scientific data on how humans and other electronics and technologies bear inside of the Van Allen belt. This thing is going up to something on the order of like 1,700 kilometers, one of the highest orbital altitudes achieved since, for like a human spacecraft since Gemini. I think since Gemini 11. So really, really awesome mission. Have 4 crew members on there. We have Jared Isaacman. For those of you who might know, he flew Inspiration 4 as the proprietor of that mission and commander. We also have Scott Pitote. Can't remember exactly how to pronounce. Insertion orbit will be 190 by 1200. Okay, so 1200. And then aren't they going higher than that, and then also reducing their altitude from there as well? They're doing a couple of maneuvers in orbit. I was thinking that they have their insertion orbit. They're going to do basically an apoapsis raising maneuver, and then basically on the 3rd day lower that back down to something lower than that as well. 700 kilometers is for the EVA. That is correct. Yes, but they are going higher before that predominant. But anyway, so we have Jared Isaacman as the commander. We have Scott Kid Patote, I can't remember his last name, as the pilot for the mission. We also have Sarah Gillis as a mission specialist, as well as Anne Manon as the second mission specialist. And so we have, I believe, all 4 members are in their tailored spaceflight suits, and not only are they in their tailored spaceflight suits, chat, but they're also getting some pretty awesome EVA suits as well. Basically, they're going to be carrying, since this is a mission that is going to require them to depressurize the cabin and have them go outside of the capsule, even if it's only a little bit. SpaceX designed very specific new suits for this mission for them to do their EVA, and they are actually based off of what you see here, their flight suits. They're basically a rendition of that. They have some extra structural components in them, and they have to fully bear both the external elements as they're outside the capsule, and longer duration, depressurization, and things like that. So they're in their fitted spacesuits, looking fantastic. So there we have Jared Isaacman. There's Scott, the pilot. We have Sarah Gillis, who I believe is the medical officer, if I'm not mistaken. And then we also have Anna Manon, who is actually part of the astronaut training program for SpaceX, which is actually pretty awesome. Yes, day 2 will be an apoapsis raise of 1400, and then lower on day 3 to 700. Nice. They will have a single suit, very basic EVA suit. Yeah, very cool. But that's what we got here for the crew, and we actually saw some really great photos coming out ahead of their dress rehearsal. Basically them going into the capsule, suiting up and doing the entire kind of run through for ingress and then egress. So yeah, as you can see here, they're in their custom chairs as well. They will, these chairs will actually, are currently basically angled down, and then right before flight, they will actually then rotate to put them back in their seat for the ride into space. But fantastic looking crew, all of them. They want you, chat. Remember, they want you for future spaceflight missions. But yeah, fantastic shot here. We can see from inside the elevator as well. They are looking to head for left side for us. Wait, also you can see who will go outside of the capsule by the camera on the right side of their face. Ah, good eye. I didn't notice that. On the left side of their face. Nice. That's true. Heck yeah. So Sarah Gillis and Jared Isaacman will be heading outside of the capsule. Nice. That's pretty slick. So we're seeing that from the cameras that they have on the inside of their helmets, where it doesn't look like Anna or Scott have it on their sides of their helmets. Not bad. Not bad, chat. So they're looking ready to go for space. Absolutely fantastic. Can't wait for this mission. It's going to be, again, launching, unless it slips for whatever reason, currently slated for Tuesday at what time? Like 3 in the morning Eastern time. Yeah, 3:38 a.m. Eastern. So this is 1:38 a.m. Mountain time. Should be when that flight is ready to go. I think that's the HUD too. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. But yeah, it should be pretty slick. For those of you that don't know exactly what they're doing, it's going to look a little bit like this. This, of course, is coming from SpaceX's official account.
Dragon, SpaceX. Successful leak checks. Dragon has initiated cabin venting.
So they are going to be completely depressurizing the Dragon capsule because there is no airlock. And they will open the forward hatch, basically inside the nose of the Dragon capsule, and then be able to step outside. Look at that. So yeah, this has been a modified Dragon capsule specifically for this mission. What is the name of this capsule? Resilience? This, I think, is the same capsule that flew on Inspiration 4, right? But yeah, pretty slick. That's what they are looking to do for this mission. It should be good, chat. I'm really excited for this one. Again, it's going to be a fully commercial-led program. The Polaris Dawn, the Polaris program for the Polaris set of missions. They have 3 of them. This is the first one looking to do the first EVA and also taking the first crew members into the radiation, the Van Allen belts, which should be good. Ever since Gemini 11, it'll be the highest spacecraft with crew on board. So it should be good. A lot of milestones bringing us back into space. Booster 1076, 1076 day turnaround. Yeah. Resilience last flew Inspiration 4. Yep, cool. But yeah, so like I said, chat, that is pretty much, unfortunately, going to do it for the Go news here. The really only Go news that we have is Polaris Dawn. Polaris Dawn is doing good things. SpaceX is doing good things. One thing I did forget to mention that's kind of interesting to think about when you are looking at the mission that Polaris Dawn is looking to actually fly. Remember I said that they have to depressurize the entire cargo Dragon capsule, which means that you have to have all suits on board able to handle that depressurization. So if you guys have heard me talk about this before, but as a risk assessment, what is the possibility of a single suit failing, and then multiply that, basically raise that to the fourth power, right? That's something that we did when we were looking at the numbers for Starship being able to be used for Mars, being able to be used for HLS on the moon. It's kind of interesting to think about, right? Because it's not just one suit, whatever the chance of that is being successful. You now have to look at all 4 suits being successful all at the same time. Now, I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, but it is interesting to think about the risk assessment, right? Because even if we say, for example, that the spacesuit is a 99% rated success, which means that 1 out of 100 you have some problem with it. It doesn't mean that it's a catastrophic problem. Don't get me wrong, it's not a catastrophic problem, but some problem that may require you to not do the depressurization on the cargo, on the crew capsule itself. And so if each one has a 99% rate of success or safety rating, then you basically have to raise that value of 99% to the fourth power, multiply 0.99 times 0.99 times 0.99 times 0.99. And what do you get? You get a 96% rate of success for the mission for achieving that specific objective. So it's just one of those things that's interesting to think about, right? So because they have to completely depress the system and all 4 crew members have to have all of their systems working at the same time, whatever the safety rating is, or the chance of success is for those specific crew members' suits, you then have to carry that through your risk assessment value for the entire mission objective. But I'm pretty sure it's not even a 99% rated success for those for those suits. It's probably more like 0.9999% safety rating on those suits, but it is something that hasn't been done, so we'll see exactly how things play out. Was there word on the software update to Starliner module to fly itself back to Earth? I haven't heard anything, no. I'm excited for this mission. Can you please upload that Moonlander also? It is already up on Kerbalex, Andy. Already up. Okay, so let's get into our no-go news chat. If you have not seen it, we heard this here yesterday at 11 a.m. I believe this was Mountain Time. Bill Nelson, first and foremost, NASA did hold a press conference, and they came out on that press conference, and we're going to listen to the entire press conference here shortly. But NASA essentially summary, spoiler alert chat, after extensive review by experts across the agency, NASA's Boeing Space Crew Flight Test, CFT, of Starliner will return with an uncrewed Starliner vehicle. Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams are scheduled to return to Earth next spring and February on board Crew 9's currently designated flight return. So Bill Nelson, of course, coming out and commenting on this, saying that space flight is risky, and of course it is, even at its safest and most routine. A test flight by nature is neither safe nor routine. Our decision to keep Butch and Sonny aboard the space station and bring Starliner home uncrewed is the result of our commitment to safety, our core value. So yeah, real punch in the gut chat. Gotta say, I was really hoping that they would be able to fly them back on Starliner. we'll get into the press conference. I actually haven't seen the press conference yet, and we'll basically do some commentary on it as it's happening. But if you guys remember us talking about this a couple weeks ago, essentially what occurred was that they had anomalous thrusters misfiring, or rather not firing when they were commanded to fire during their approach to the International Space Station. And so what they found out was basically heat soak coming from the thrusters and the orbital maneuvering system engines were soaking into the dog houses, basically these houses that hold the thrusters for Starliner. It was causing them to heat up to a point where the Teflon seal would then expand, and then once everything cooled down and contracted, those expanded seals were basically then blocking oxidizer from being pumped into the combustion chamber to actually have RCS fire at subsequent flight times. So really unfortunate that we didn't see this or catch this earlier, because we did hear apparently from Boeing or NASA that the main reason for this is that whole heat dynamics on the thruster was not modeled correctly. Those were, like, I'm paraphrasing of course, but that was essentially the sentiment. Whatever that means, not modeled correctly, the dynamics on those thrusters in this configuration is really coming to break this entire mission apart in terms of returning crew home back to White Sands on board Starliner, as was the mission objectives for this crew flight test. So yeah, what does this mean? I'm hopeful. Boeing has said that they are committed to making Starliner work. This is just unfortunate. It is the way that flight tests go. It's good to find these problems now during flight tests, but you can only say that so much. Because we've also learned that there are other problems with Starliner, and we have apparently learned, and I'm still waiting for confirmation. The whole problem with this chat is, oh my God, it's so frustrating. Out of all of these press conferences, we still haven't heard from Boeing engineers. We haven't heard from Boeing representatives on this, right? For the past 3 conferences, ever since Starliner, basically made the approach and dock with ISS in the first place, NASA's held press conferences. We haven't had Boeing in the loop on it to even be able to figure out from their side what the heck is going on and why. Totally mind-boggling to me and really frustrating, because I would like to know a couple of things. One, why were your thruster dynamics this far wrong or modeled incorrectly during the now third flight test of Starliner? Well, I guess technically fourth, right? Because they redid one of them and then pushed that one back. So is this the 4th flight test for Starliner? But not only that, but apparently during the last flight test, the uncrewed flight test, the demonstration flight to the ISS, they apparently saw this same issue before. I'm still waiting to get confirmation on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what I remember hearing somewhere during either the press conference, previous press conference, or something like that, that this thruster anomaly was seen before, and yet here we still are. It's just the rover, not the capsule. Oh, you want the CEV version? That one's not tested yet. So I'm waiting to fix the CEV version, the crew capsule version. Remember when the flight was called an unqualified success in the press shortly after the launch? I actually don't remember that, Jim, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's actually so weird we haven't heard from Boeing yet. That's what I'm saying. Do you think they'll consider this a mishap eventually? I don't think so. That's a good question, actually, Lazarus. Like, for things to be classified as a mishap, NASA actually does have very strict rules applied to, like, what is categorized as a mishap. And it's things like, NASA personnel were injured or killed. And there's different levels of mishaps, right? Like different criticalities. But like a type A or whatever, like super critical event is like NASA personnel were injured or killed. Like type B is like NASA support personnel, so like not NASA personnel, but like commercial support personnel were injured or killed, or maybe it's just injured and not killed. That would probably still be part of type A, right? And then it's like NASA property was significantly damaged. And there's one more that's like even less than that, but it all revolves around, actually having something damaged or personnel injured or things like that. So just based off of that, I don't think so, but it doesn't mean like they couldn't, we're not privy to all of the information that NASA and Boeing have in front of them. So yeah, if NASA sees this as an egregious error that put people in harm's way or property in harm's way, like the ISS, for example, then maybe. But I don't think it classifies it. We even heard that, on the previous the previous press conference, that I think they asked that specific question, and the representatives from NASA were like, no, don't think so. This is a flight test. We're learning, no harm, no foul, other than this is just kind of an unknown area. So we don't want to take unnecessary risks. So, we're not going to, that sort of thing. Hey, Uncle Bill, how are you? Loss of vehicle control would be a natural safety related mishap. However, I don't think they lost control or they wouldn't have docked. Yeah, exactly, Skogs, right? So I think that's the other, maybe that's like the fourth criticality is, or maybe that's even part of the third, is like when you're putting NASA property or even NASA personnel at risk in any way. But they never lost control. They clearly were able to dock safely. It's just, this is an unknown, right? And NASA, thankfully, and in no, I mean this in no shot or disrespect to NASA, but thankfully they have learned, right, not to take any unnecessary chances. Like that has been ingrained into every NASA engineer and higher up representative over the decades. This is an unknown territory, right? We're seeing dynamics of a thruster that were not taken account for. We can't necessarily gather the information here from the space station that's needed to actually qualify those thrusters to do the return flight with Butch and Sunny. So this is an unknown. Why take the risk? I understand it. I've been a heavy proponent of them trying to, use Starliner to return. But of course, it only goes so far. That can only be done when there is sufficient data to back that up from a safety perspective, right? We talked about this a couple streams ago, I think, where it was like, of course, them doing the other version, which is the current slated, now the current slated mission, right? Which is to have Dragon Capsule Crew 9 take 2 up, and then Butch and Sunny are going to return 4 on down from that Crew 9 capsule on Dragon. That also, includes risks in terms of your mission profile. For one, the Boeing suits do not, we learned this during the last press conference, that apparently the Boeing suits and the Dragon suits are incompatible with each other. So Boeing suits for Starliner can't actually fit into the ECLS system for Dragon. So they'd have to send suits up or just say, so that's an inherent risk, or, additional complexity added. You now have multiple vehicles that are going to have to go up. There's going to be a time where we don't have technically a vehicle for Butch and Sunny until the Crew 9 capsule gets there. There's risk in doing it this way now with Crew 9 capsule going up and returning them in comparison to just having them fly back on Starliner. But you got to weigh the scales, chat, right? You got to weigh the scales, and you got to look at the data that you do have and look at the unknowns and the, basically criticality levels of the possible failure modes, and then basically assess which one is actually more risky. And they currently are thinking Starliner is more risky than the alternative, which is totally understandable. So yeah, like I cannot overstate the importance of, I'm sure, the work that Boeing and NASA have done in tandem to figure all of this out, right? Unfortunately, that's another thing that I would love to have a Boeing representative or engineer in the loop during these conversations to actually tell us exactly what's been going on from their perspective, because I've been a part of a pretty involved investigation into a mishap, if you want to call it that, or into some sort of vehicle anomaly. It was actually part of an engine explosion, but anyways, from there, in order to actually do your analysis to figure out the root cause of the problem, you basically look at your engine, you look at where the anomaly occurred, you try to replicate it, whether in simulation or even on the pad again, in a controlled environment. You then call the manufacturers of every single part that could be in that problem area, get as much information from those manufacturers. Those manufacturers might have to make calls to sub-manufacturers or component manufacturers. It's a heavily involved process to really try and get to the root problem and try to figure out exactly what's going on. And unfortunately, because the thrusters in question are on the ISS and not on the ground, we are in an unknown environment to be able to make that call on returning crew on Starliner. But it's a lot, chat. It's very involved. I'd love to know exactly what Boeing has been doing behind the scenes, but fair enough. I want to do a Duna mission. Should I send a fuel tanker ahead of the launch window before crewed Duna mission? I want to send a Saturn 1B with a lander and Orion capsule. I would, yeah. Yeah, Andy, you're probably going to need fuel for that depending on your Orion capsule and Saturn 1B designs. For interplanetary missions, that's stretching it a lot. I think there is a deeper problem with the design of valves. If temperature is a problem, which caused thruster shutdown and lack of oxygen to flow, how far can you push it before something happens that sticks it open? Lack of thrust is moderately easy to plan around. Thrust you can't turn off is a problem. I'm betting they had sticky on at the ground testing. I'm not sure, Skogs, only because the thruster valves in question, if they fail, their safety failure is closed. They have a fail close safety, which means that, if they do open and something gets lodged, I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen, but like if something, like if the valve lost power, or like you said, there was some sort of FOD, typically their safe position is closed. So you'd have to have a pretty significant clog to keep your valve from closing. And then if you have that clog keeping the valve from closing, then you're probably not even getting any oxygen through it. But of course, like I'm saying, like I'm not saying that can't happen, but yeah, I don't know how probable that is with these valve designs. The work Boeing hasn't done is more important. I'm not sure if it's so much that. I really am hesitant to jump on the bandwagon saying Boeing is not doing the work they need to do or all that sort of stuff. It's definitely always a management issue, right? Like, how are all of these things happening to Starliner? Clearly there is something going wrong. I don't think it's work that Boeing hasn't done. I would also like clarity on this. So if somebody knows something more than me at this point, please let me know, whether it's in the YouTube comments afterwards or right now in chat. But I'm pretty sure these thrusters are designed and basically taken from the maneuvering system, the RCS thrusters from the space shuttle, which, if I remember correctly, would have been Aerojet Rocketdyne, now L3 Harris, and it's in a different configuration. So the reason why I bring that up, and which is why it's important, and I would love confirmation on this, I brought it up in EJ's chat before. There are multiple papers talking about these valve poppet issues, specifically the Teflon seals overexpanding, going all the way back from NASA technical reports back in like the 80s and the early 90s for the space shuttle. The early space shuttle missions also saw Teflon seal valve issues. One of them was due to thermal conditioning, essentially them getting too hot and then cooling off, and then basically the Teflon seal expanded, and when it cooled off it couldn't retract, and so then that basically kept you from being able to, that Teflon seal overexpanded, keeping any sort of oxidizer flowing from there. Sounds like a similar issue here, but I don't know. It's a totally different system, and I have not been able to confirm whether these thrusters truly are, basically taken off the shuttle in terms of design and put into a new configuration for Starliner. I'm not sure. That's why I'm curious, but we did see very similar issues on the shuttle RCS systems as well. Blue Dog is fantastic, Andy. I would definitely recommend that. Redoing analysis can take a few weeks to plug through new numbers to try and better correlate the model as well, so everyone complaining about not having an answer in a week were laughable. Yeah, that's true. Definitely saw a lot of not understanding what goes on behind the scenes, which is to nobody's fault. We haven't had Boeing in the loop to tell us, and NASA unfortunately hasn't told us either. Not straightforward, right? Because Boeing, I believe, would have led this investigation since it's their system, and they would have informed NASA, and NASA, depending on exactly what that information is, could be Boeing proprietary and ITAR restricted data. So yeah, unfortunately we haven't had a Boeing representative on these calls to be able to tell us, oh, well, we've done this and we've done this, and this is the problem with the model, and this is, I would love to know the entire tree of decision making here, but unfortunately we only get one side, and it's a game of telephone. At least that's what it seems like. Shouldn't Rocketdyne be also involved in some of these talks with the public? Not necessarily. I guess it kind of depends, but it's Boeing's system. Boeing should have had all of the data. Boeing would have been conversing with Airjet Rocketdyne, now L3 Harris, to understand these thrusters and whatnot. So probably not Rocketdyne, but I wouldn't, I mean, Boeing would definitely be in talks with them. So you don't think the team is inexperienced? I don't really think the team is inexperienced. I really don't. I mean, I say, okay, here's the caveat, right? Right? I wouldn't just say that they're inexperienced as in they don't know what they're doing, or they, don't know how to design a capsule and things like that. I truly believe it is just a very complex system that has kind of like the Artemis program on Orion, trying to take things that have already worked for flight heritage and repackaging it into a new system. You're always going to get growing pains from doing that. That's why one of Atkins' laws of spacecraft design is to sometimes it's best just to start from scratch. I mean, that's essentially what Dragon did, right? They created a new capsule essentially from scratch. That was Dragon 1, and they used Dragon 1 and what they learned to then put all those systems into Dragon 2. Of course, it's much more complex than that, but they took what they built new from the design and integrated it into Dragon 2 for what they currently have as their Dragon 2 capsule. But I mean, Boeing has a lot of experience in space flight design. Granted, human-rated crew capsules in space are a whole different ball game than what they're typically doing. But I wouldn't just jump on the bandwagon and have this blanket statement that it's inexperience. I don't think it's that. They mentioned the doghouse might be causing issues radiating the heat from the thrusters. Yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is that they apparently have this thermal model, and apparently, quote unquote, paraphrasing here, I think we heard this from NASA, that the thermal model was incorrect or the thermal model was wrong. But because we haven't had Boeing on the call, my question would be to them is, how is it wrong? You've flown this 3 or 4 times already. Does anybody know the exact number? Is this the 4th flight test for Starliner? It is, right? And you've had at least 3 flights now to be able to correlate data back into your thermal model to understand what could possibly be going wrong. And then on top of that, like I said, again, I haven't confirmed this, I would love to actually know, is apparently this issue has been seen before on the capsule on their last flight test, the uncrewed demonstration mission to the International Space Station. If that's true, then why are we here? Like, why are we in this situation right now if this was in fact seen earlier? So yeah, like I said, a lot of things left to the imagination right now. It doesn't work. In what way, Andy? What do you mean? Didn't they say something about not having counted the sun's heat enough? I think at some point they mentioned that. Yeah, I think I vaguely do remember that as well, Lazarus, that part of the issue was their worst case heating scenario wasn't worst case enough, essentially. Right, because when you do a thermal model on your spacecraft, you typically look at least 2 scenarios. One being worst case direct sunlight for your hottest, and the second being the worst case scenario of out of sunlight being the coldest. And so from that thermal model, you can understand how hot your system gets when it's idle and how hot your system gets when it's in full thrust mode, essentially, to understand if that's going to cause issues with any of your actuating systems. So yeah, apparently like I said, the thermal model was quote unquote incorrect or wrong or incorrectly modeled, whatever that means. And so then I ask, why? Why is it now incorrect when we've had multiple flights to correlate data? But it's just interesting. Again, I wish we could have Boeing on the call. RCS, and it does not have the rover. I'm not sure which. Oh, the rover. Ah, I see. Okay. Yeah, I can upload that one later. What LES engines are on Starliner? Launch escape engines. They are the prime. They're actually integrated into the launch vehicle. See if we can get a shot of it here. It's in the bottom of the capsule. You can kind of see it here on the renders, but let's see. Yeah. Launch aboard engines. It has 4 of them inside of the service module. I'm not sure what type of engines they are. LES escape thrusters is what it says, but I'm not sure exactly what type of engine they are off the top of my head. But yeah, they're 4 integrated ones at the bottom here. They did say they had unexpected heat levels were observed. Unexpected, exactly. Like, I don't know what that means. It's from what my understanding is, their worst case scenario thermal model for like direct sunlight wasn't worst case enough. They didn't account, apparently, again, I'm paraphrasing or might be misremembering, but apparently the orbital maneuvering engines, the OMAC thrusters, the larger thrusters on the Starliner capsule that are used for like actual orbital maneuvering, like moving between orbits, right? That firing on top of them being in direct sunlight had heat soak back into the thrusters that were also firing for attitude control, and then that being higher temperatures than what were apparently modeled. That's my kind of assumption based on what I believe I've been hearing. But yeah, that's not sure. Anyways, chat. So that's a long rant though. Could be the interface. So Airjet assumed more heat would soak back to Starliner, but instead it's saying staying in the thruster and getting too hot. Yeah, don't know. I wish we had Boeing on the line. It is still just a model. Real life means expecting the unexpected. Very true. Very true. Trust but verify should always be kept in the forefront of every engineer's minds when they're building something, especially a crew vehicle. Just went to Russia SpaceX using lasers to overheat the West yeah, Panderific. Wow. That would be pretty crazy conspiracies for sure. Do you think NASA will force them to do another test flight or demo mission? That's a good question. I honestly have no idea, only because we don't know really how severe this problem is. But the fact that they're not returning crew on there, I could see them say waiving that for Boeing if Boeing truly has everything from here on out go right and they actually figure out the problem with the thrusters. Like if they have this fully autonomously come back down to White Sands basically as the second, fully autonomous return flight, and they can definitively fix the thruster issues or show that the problem has been fixed, I can see them waiving another flight test for Boeing only because Boeing has already flown one at their own dime. But I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't know. We don't know all the data that NASA and Boeing have. So if the issue is deeper than that, then yeah, I can easily see them saying that you have to do another crew test flight. But at your own expense, that'd be kind of crazy, In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is a difference. Yeah, that's true. I guess it depends on if it returns safely or not. Yeah, that's for sure. But anyways, chat, let's go ahead and get into the press conference. What do we say? So I'm going to load up the press conference here. And just to make sure we don't have any Twitch ads on the Twitch side during the press conference, whether you guys have watched this or not, I'm going to run a quick ad break. Not going to do anything, just going to chill and wait for the press conference here, and then we'll get into it, chat. So see you on Twitch side in 3 minutes. Meanwhile, I want to see, does this actually take a while? It does. Okay, so we're just going to be in the waiting room for a minute while Twitch ads go through. Whew. Yeah, so for those of you on the YouTube side, hello, how are you? This was the press conference that occurred at 1 p.m. Eastern yesterday, Saturday, August 24th. That actually gave us the news that Starliner was going to return without crew. So yeah, kind of a bummer. Kind of a bummer. But we'll see. We'll see exactly all that said. I'm definitely interested in the questions and the answers to the question and answer portion. They're probably going to say, we're going to be beginning the press conference here shortly. Or not. Just another song. If NASA delivers a conference on a Saturday, it's not good. That's kind of true, actually, yeah. That's a little bit on the true side. Well, remember, they were trying to get this figured out by the end of August. Wasn't their last day to figure this out like August 20? It was either August 29th or August 24th. And if it's August 24th, then this makes sense. If it's August 29th, then they technically had a few more days that they could have pushed this decision. But yeah, they basically, I remember them saying it was either the 29th or the 24th, I believe, but they said this was the deadline they had to make a definitive decision on whether crew were going to come back on Starliner or not. All right, should have another minute on the Twitch ads, which actually might be perfect because it might line up pretty well with the press conference here for the most part. If it is good news, then call me flabbergasted, yeah. You can't spell bad without ad, yeah. Should only be another 30 seconds on the ad break here on Twitch, at which point we will get into the press conference. And probably what I'm going to do, chat, is have it go for a while and then make some commentary here and there. Based on my thoughts, if there's anything worth commentating on, and then question and answer should be good. Really hopeful to see some questions that are getting answered. That's the main thing. We have all these unknowns, unfortunately, from the public's perspective, and I do wonder how much of the unknowns is coming from NASA. But NASA's at least in contact with Boeing. At least they should be. Yeah, we'll see. All right, so it looks like the Twitch ad break is over. Let's go ahead and get into the press conference. There we go. So remember, this was from 1 p.m. 1 p.m. yesterday.
Good afternoon, and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space Center. I'm Mira Bernstein in NASA's Office of Communications. Thank you for joining us today and for an update on NASA's Boeing Starliner.
NASA's
crew
volume
flight
is
test.
always super low.
To give you an update, we have NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, Associate Administrator Jim Free, Associate Administrator for Space Operations Ken Bowersox, Commercial Crew Program
solid.
Manager Steve Stitch,
So is Steve.
International Space Station Program Manager Dana Weigel, and Flight Operations Director Norm Knight. We'll be taking questions from those in the room and over the phone. As a reminder, you can press *1 to get into the queue.
Bill
But
at
first,
2
I'd
times
like
speed,
to hand it
yeah.
over to Administrator Nelson for opening remarks.
Thanks. NASA has decided that Butch and
Off
Sonny
the rip.
will return with Crew 9 next February.
February, 8 months
and that
extended time.
Starliner will return uncrewed, and the specifics in the schedule will be discussed momentarily. I want you to know that Boeing has worked very hard with NASA to get the necessary data to make this decision. We want to further understand the root causes and understand the design
Probably, Panda.
improvements so that the Boeing Starliner will serve as an important part of our assured crew access to the ISS. I have just talked to the new Boeing CEO, Kelly Ortberg. I have expressed this to him. I told him how well Boeing worked with our team to come to this decision. And he expressed to me an intention that they will continue to work the problems once Starliner is back safely, and that we will have our redundancy and our crewed access to the space station. This whole discussion, remember, is put in the context of we have had mistakes done in the past. We lost 2 space shuttles as a result of there not being a culture in which information could come forward. We have been very solicitous of all of our employees that if you have some objection, you come forward. Spaceflight is
Dissenting
risky,
opinions, chat.
even at its safest, and even at its most routine. And a test flight by nature is neither safe nor routine. And so the decision to keep Butch and Sonny aboard the International Space Station and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety. Our core value is safety, and it is our North Star. And I'm grateful to NASA and to Boeing for their teams, for all the incredible and detailed work to get to this decision. Turn it over to Jim.
Yeah, so just real quick walkthrough. Definitely really happy that Bill off the rip gave us the big headliner news for the press conference, and it wasn't going to be, you know, after hearing updates elsewhere. But yeah, so in the first 30 seconds, we got the news that Starliner is going to be returning uncrewed. But like I said, I am glad, and he actually iterated here, of course, they're not going to take unnecessary risks. As Bill talked about, they've lost astronauts, you know, taking unnecessary risks, arguably, in the past. So he basically mentioned that. Don't know. I've said this on stream before. I'll say it again. I personally don't like the whole safety is our core value. I get the sentiment behind it. Like, that's, of course, always something that should be, you know, inherent in your designs and your operations as a human spaceflight company or human spaceflight organization. My argument, though, is that reliability should be a core value. And if you make your systems reliable, you are inherently making them safe. Because technically speaking, you can make an unreliable system safe, and, you know, that can cause other issues. But anyways, that's beside the point. Let's get back into it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you and Deputy Administrator Melroy for your support along the way, and certainly for being here today. It means a lot. I'd like to communicate to all of you that we've come to this decision using our program, our mission directorate, and our agency level processes. That includes the decisions that happen at the commercial crew program, at the space operations mission directorate level, and the agency level, and includes all of our technical authorities from engineering, safety, medical, and flight operations. As the administrator said, our focus is on safety all the time, and this certainly is no different. The uncertainty in our margins is where we have come to make the decision that the administrator laid out. That uncertainty remains in our understanding of the physics going on in the thrusters, and we still have some work to go. You'll hear more from others on the specifics, but I'll tell you that the NASA and Boeing team have made incredible technical progress in the model development that has gone on, the thruster testing, understanding material properties within the valve, and the complicated fluid physics that are happening inside.
You know, that's the thing that irks me, chat. I'll say it again. Yes, Boeing is working very hard. They couldn't spare one Boeing representative for the press conference. Like, why? I just wish I knew why. Like, is this a NASA decision? Is this a Boeing decision? Like, where is Boeing? Just one representative, one person to be able to answer questions or things like that. Now, I understand that one person, if they do give one person, is going to be bombarded by all of the questions. There'd have to be some gatekeeping, if you will, because otherwise something like this, since they haven't had any Boeing representatives on the line beforehand, they would be crushed by questions in the media and all that sort of stuff, right? But that's also partly to Boeing's fault. Like, why weren't they in the press conferences prior to this? But anyways, I just wish we could get word from Boeing on this in any way, shape, or form.
We will continue to learn. We are a learning organization, and I think we've done.
It's one thing to say that Boeing wasn't a part of the decision, and that's fine. They don't need to be a part of the decision to be there to answer the public's questions on what's going on with Starliner. Now, again, granted, that comes with a caveat, because it's Boeing's system. It is probably, well, it is certainly ITAR protected. It is certainly proprietary trade secret protected. But at the same time, it would be great. It'd be great to have Boeing on the line just to answer some more of the technical questions revolving around the thermal model, or the configuration that it's in, or what testing have they done, or what, something would be great. Something would be better than nothing. But yeah, I understand that Boeing probably isn't part of the decision making here for Butch and Sunny to go to not be on Starliner during its return. But man, it'd be great to have a little transparency on their front.
Demonstrated that here.
I'm not sure, Andy.
We'll learn from this effort so that our crews who are at the top of the pyramid on these missions and their families can continue to know we've done that and we'll always do our best. For our team, our programmatic and technical teams, both NASA and the Commercial Crew Program, in the Space Station Program, and our Boeing teammates have worked endlessly to get to launch, and certainly in the past 2 months. They've done this while the whole world has gone on around them. Hurricanes, the hurricane through Florida, the hurricane through here, while their homes are damaged and without power, they came to work. Some of them lost family members along the way. Their kids went back to school and life in general went on, but they were here every day working long hours. They have persevered, and I want them to know how grateful I am that they are on our team. This has not been an easy decision, but it is absolutely the right one. Let me turn it over to Ken Bowersox and thank Ken and all the leaders here and the ones that are not here with us today for their work.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to you and the administrator for joining us for this press conference and for our meetings. You guys have been heavily involved, and we appreciate that. I also want to thank everybody who's here in the room with us and watching online. It says a lot that you're with us on a Saturday, and I want you to know how much we appreciate your support as we work to fly our mission safely. I'm really proud of the NASA team and the Boeing team for all the work they've been doing the last couple of months. It's really been impressive to see how they've been very agile in testing, gathering data, and completing analysis. And then having the tough discussions that go along with processing that data and coming to conclusions. Our intent today was to have the first part of a flight readiness review. The goal of that review was to come up with a NASA recommendation on whether we should proceed with the crewed flight test, either crewed or uncrewed. Our Boeing partners told us that they would be able to execute either option, and they thought that the call belonged to NASA because of our wider view of all the risks involved.
ISS
we
and
conducted
such.
a poll. All of the organizations on the polling sheet indicated that they thought we should proceed uncrewed with the flight test. And so our next step will be to process toward that uncrewed flight test. To finish those preparations, and we'll have another part 2 of the readiness review Wednesday or Thursday next week, we believe, to make sure that we're ready for undock and to complete the test. We are still in the middle of a test flight. We have to remain vigilant. We need to get the vehicle back on deck, go through the data, and once we've done that, we'll start thinking about our next steps for Starliner's next flight. And now I'd like to pass the mic to Steve to share more info and more details.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks for the kind words. I want to thank all of you for being here, and the public and everybody for following our progress over the summer.
So real quick on what Ken Bowersox talked about. So it's good to know a little bit more behind the scenes of what's going on. A lot of the press and even myself have been wondering, when they were talking about doing this review process to come to a definitive decision on what the next steps were for Butch and Sunny and Starliner. They were talking about setting up, creating a panel and then being able to poll this panel. But it's cool to see a little bit more information coming there from Ken, the associate NASA administrator for the Space Directorate, Space Mission Directorate operations. So essentially what they're talking about was they did create that panel of experts, but from multiple different agencies within NASA, from different space centers. And then they basically provided a poll, and the poll said from all these different experts that a majority of them said to go with the uncrew Starliner return. So it's cool to see a little bit more information there and get confirmation on that process.
It's been a long summer. It's been a long summer for our team, and I want to first start out by thanking our team, who's worked so hard over the summer, long hours, weekends, nights, testing, analysis, reviews. I mean,
Yeah, remember, this thing flew in June.
By the team.
June 5th.
We are dealing with a very complex issue with the thrusters, and I'll talk more about that, but it's challenging to predict their performance. It's challenging to predict the temperatures we'll see. And so that's why it's been tough, and it's taken the time ever since we docked back on June 6th to get to this point. Very proud of the due diligence that the team has displayed, their perseverance, their fortitude, courage, dedication, resilience as they learned more and we got more data and different results at times than we expected. I especially want to thank the Boeing team and their contractor team, Aerojet Rocketdyne, the engine manufacturer, the valve manufacturer,
so that's
Moog,
confirmed.
all their suppliers
and it's
that participated, along with the NASA workforce. We have brought in.
So that's interesting. So for those who don't know, those are two big subcontractors for different components for spacecraft. Aerojet Rocketdyne, apparently, according to that, makes the thrusters themselves, but then they also take the valves from Moog, M-O-O-G. Moog is also kind of like a major prime, if you will, within the spaceflight industry that develops avionics, they develop valves, they develop their own propulsion systems, they develop Esper rings, like the structures, they develop a lot of stuff. They're like a component manufacturer for the aerospace industry. So that's interesting. So we just heard that Moog supplies the valves, and then of course Aerojet Rocketdyne supplies the thrusters with those valves integrated, and it's the valves that are the issue. Like I said before, from all the information that's kind of been gathered, to my understanding, is that the valves basically have it's a poppet valve. Basically, it's a designed valve, a tapered seal that is also made of Teflon. So it's a Teflon seal, and apparently when that system sees too much heat, that Teflon seal expands and then does not allow that valve to open to let oxidizer. I believe it's the oxidizer side that's seeing the problem, and therefore you don't get combustion and you don't get ignition on that thruster. So yeah, it's good to hear a little bit more about the tree of components. So you basically have Aerojet Rocketdyne supplying to, you have Moog supplying the poppet valves into Aerojet Rocketdyne, who's supplying the thrusters, and then that's going into Boeing for integration.
Expertise from just about every NASA center. We did testing at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Of course, our White Sands test facility did testing on the thrusters. So this has been a huge effort across all of NASA within the commercial crew program and even beyond. Determining the position to bring Starliner back uncrewed was very difficult for me personally. We're all committed to the mission, which we started out, which is to bring Butch and Sunny back. But as we got more and more data over the summer and understood the uncertainty of that data, it became very clear to us that the best course of action was to return Starliner uncrewed, and I'll talk about the other aspects of the mission in a little bit.
So that's interesting. Oh God, that's such a cluster, chat. So they've been doing all of this testing. They've been gathering as much data as they can, and they're seeing discontinuities in that data. Basically, they're testing the same thing multiple times, and those tests are resulting in different results every time. Or, not every time, but that's crazy. That's like worst case scenario, right? Like typically within spaceflight, things are pretty deterministic, right? That's why we see, like, for launch vehicle providers, when you see like an engine explode on the test stand, they usually can do a root cause analysis and say, like, see, this single component failed at this operating condition and then caused the problem, and then you can fix that one component. But it's because they can usually replicate the problem on the ground, and apparently without any other additional information to go off of. They have been able to replicate it on the ground, but not consistently. Or either that or they haven't been able to replicate it on the ground, which is also something that we've seen in the thruster issues previously. Remember at the very beginning, after their first orbital flight test, when they had all those problems, and then they had a long wait time before their next mission, the thruster valves actually seized on the launch pad, and they actually had to like wheel it back. It delayed Starliner more. Then they had to make all of these modifications to the thruster valve housings to try and keep moisture out and all that sort of stuff, because it was causing problems. Well, that too was also a similar issue where during the entire OFT1 preps, they never saw the problem, and then all of a sudden it happened in OFT2 before takeoff, and then they didn't see the problem, and then it happened again to where they then finally made the modification. So it's like worst case scenario, your data is inconsistent, your testing is inconsistent. It's horrible.
The bottom line relative to bringing Starliner back is there was just too much uncertainty in the prediction of the thrusters. If we had a model, if we had a way to accurately predict what the thrusters would do for the undock and all the way through the deorbit burn and through the separation sequence, I think we would have taken a different course of action. But when we looked at the data and looked at the potential for thruster failures with a crew on board, and then getting into this very tight sequence of finishing the deorbit burn, which puts the vehicle on an entry, and then immediately maneuvering from that into a SEP sequence to separate the service module and crew module, it was just too much risk with the crew, and so we decided to pursue the uncrewed test flight. The path forward now is to, as Ken said, work toward the Flight Readiness Review Part 2. Well, we review now. We know the scope of the mission. We know it's an uncrewed test flight. We are changing the separation sequence that we planned, and we will review those aspects at the readiness review. We're going to go with a simplified separation technique to get away from station a little more quickly. We'll get to the deorbit burn and execute that nominally. We have a good setup in terms of the opportunities into the White Sands Space Harbor for a number of opportunities in September. We'll land or undock in early September, and then we have a lot of work to do relative to the rest of the mission, which is Bush and Sunny stay on the space station for some time, and they return on Crew 9. We're configuring that spacecraft with a couple extra, 2 different seats. So we'll have 2 different crew members, 2 crew members on that vehicle, and then we'll have it ready to bring Butch and Sunny home. So they'll be ballast in 2 seats on the uphill. We also have to work to reconfigure the Crew 8 vehicle. When Starliner undocks, it will undock first, and then the Crew 8 vehicle will serve as the lifeboat for Butch and Sunny. We have a configuration on the cargo pallet we'll go put in place. So again, we'll get Calypso home ready to do so.
So remember I was talking about those inherent risks of doing this alternative mission style, is that Starliner is going to undock, and technically speaking that means that we're going to have 1 fewer capsule, and like 1 capsule that has too few seats for the astronauts on board. But yeah, they're talking about having mitigations for that issue.
So we're going to take our time taking the steps, each step along the way. We'll have an important simulation ahead of that flight readiness review with the flight control team. If you put yourself in their place, they have practiced for 2 years to bring a crew home on Starliner. There are some differences in executing the undock sequence and the coast to the deorbit burn and the deorbit burn without a crew, and so they're going to practice that next week.
Yeah, so that is also a little important because we've been talking about during this entire stream is like, does all of these changes with the operations of Starliner going to affect Starliner's go for NASA to use commercially without them doing another flight test? Yeah, if it's different, again, that's not great, because then that means the actual flight of Starliner for the entire mission profile as it's meant to be with crew on board is not happening. As he was just saying, it's going to have to go through a different undock sequence than what would normally be with crew on board. Yeah, that's not good, because then you're going to have a capsule that has not technically been tested with crew on board in a specific configuration that it's designed to operate in. So whether, like I said before, whether or not it is big enough of a critical operational point, like to where NASA's fine with this being this way, because, you know, things like the reentry profile is still the same, the heat shield still performs nominally, all these other things. Maybe NASA will waive the requirement for another flight test, but it's not good. It's not good.
I'm extremely grateful for the Commercial Crew Program, the entire team. It's an honor to represent them here today, and I'll turn it over to Dana Weigel.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all very much.
I do want to know how this
here
impacts
for your
ISS.
interest in this historic test flight
She's
mission,
the
and
ISS
also in the
manager or
International
director.
Space Station.
Manager.
As you heard, with the decision to leave Butch and Sunny on board till February, they'll be with us on station for 8 months. I think most of you know our normal expedition durations are 6 months long, but we have had a number of flights with astronauts who've stayed on board with us for 12 months at a time. So this 8-month stay is very much within our normal operational experience base.
I don't know if y'all have kept up with the shit show of what X and, you know, Twitter actually have been, but there's been a lot of I guess questions, to put it lightly, about if they can actually expand their mission from 8 days to 8 months. You know, like the original flight time was supposed to be like 8 days, and now they're saying 8 months. Yeah, people have definitely been overestimating the I guess challenges, if you will, for extending a crew some additional months like this, but it's not really outside the purview of NASA's capabilities for the ISS.
While Butch and Sunny are on board, they'll be doing science, station maintenance. They'll execute the SpaceX 31 research and cargo mission, and we may have a couple spacewalks for them towards the end of their expedition. Since they've been up there, they've been a welcome set of helping hands. They've already done about 100 hours of work on 42 different experiments, and they've helped us with some of the critical station maintenance that we've had on board. For us, looking forward, the station team is focused on the planning and the rework for the undock, the Starliner undock. As you heard from Steve, that's targeted for early September. Before we hit that undock window, we're going to do the work to reconfigure the Crew 8 Dragon. We'll probably do that within the next week or so to have that in place for a 6-crew contingency return capability. And just to reiterate, as Steve said, this just gives us a contingency capability after Starliner departs and before the Crew 9 vehicle arrives. Crew 9 with 2 crew will launch no earlier than September 24th. We'll do a normal handover
so
between
1 month
the crews,
for Crew
and then
9.
we'll have Crew 8 undock. After that,
Which is why they needed to make this decision now.
So that Dragon vehicle will be relocated to open up the forward port for the SpaceX 31 cargo mission. And we're planning that mission somewhere in mid-October. In between all of that, we've got a Soyuz crew exchange. That's happening September 11th will be the launch of 73S. That'll be carrying NASA astronaut Don Pettit. And then Tracy Dyson will go home after that Soyuz exchange. So we've got a lot of busy activities.
Yeah, truly. So ISS, even with all these issues, is still as active as ever. So they have a cargo mission from Dragon going up. That'll be in October, they said. They have another Soyuz being used to carry one NASA astronaut up and also some Russian cosmonauts up. They also have the Crew 9 mission going up now for Butch and Sunny to return on. They're still doing all of the activities that NASA and ISS are going to have to go through. So
in front of us this fall.
All while juggling this issue.
On behalf of the station program, I do want to thank the entire team, the Commercial Crew Program, the Boeing team, and all of our technical teams. They've done a tremendous amount of work over the summer, getting us to the point where we have enough data and enough information to make this really critical and difficult decision that we've made today. So very much appreciated. And as I think all of you know, Commercial Crew Program is critical to the success of ISS. So we appreciate everything they've done. And with that, I'll hand it over to Norm Knight.
Thank you, Dana. I want to thank all of you for your continued interest in our mission. And I want to echo my gratitude for the teams on the ground, both Boeing and NASA, and our astronauts on board for their tireless work and effort with this test flight over many years, especially during the last few months. You know, with the dedication to, or the decision to fly Starliner home uncrewed, the ground teams will still be fully engaged, ensuring Starliner returns safely. You know, while the teams are hard at work here on the ground, we also have Butch and Sonny living and working 260 miles above our planet. They're giving our teams valuable feedback on Starliner. They've served as an integral part of our on-orbit increment, and they demonstrated patience, adaptability, flexibility, resilience, and readiness. That's what you get with an American astronaut. They've been eager to contribute to important conversations. They've asked questions. They've seamlessly become part of the Expedition 71 crew, contributing to the important work on board the International Space Station. You know, when you're charting new paths for exploration, there are highs and lows. We all know this. It's part of exploration and moving forward. Spaceflight is hard. The margins are thin. The space environment is not forgiving. And we have to be right. We all know this. This was a tough problem to be solved, and a decision had to be made. I want you to remember, Starliner is a robust vehicle with excellent flying qualities, as evidenced by the manual demonstration.
I do just want to point this out that technically speaking, on paper, mind you, this is on paper, Starliner has a higher safety rating than the Dragon 2 capsule based on requirements. Now it's different, again, by saying that your vehicle was designed to this requirement, and then of course having those requirements actually be met, right? Because you have to kind of trust but verify, that whole, you know, spiel. But yeah, I think Starliner had a safety rating of like 295, and the Dragon capsule met the minimum safety requirement rating of like 275. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. How many of those questions started? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of questions, a lot of like, what the heck is going on? Their craft failed, and now they're taking some other craft on the low road. Yeah. Anyways, chat.
Accomplished by Butch prior to docking. And Starliner has performed exceptionally well overall, so please don't lose sight of that. This is a test flight, and the thruster issue and the associated investigations will pay huge dividends in the future for human exploration in a great way when Starliner flies again.
That is actually an excellent point that should not be understated or underemphasized. The work that they're doing now, material science, especially in space, is one pain in the butt, chat. Because you have to go through so many different thermal cycles. You have these different materials coming into contact with high heat from your thrusters, and then the vast coldness of space on the shade side from the sun. You have super toxic and corrosive propellants like NTO and monomethylhydrazine, or unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. And NTO, like it's crazy. Material science is absolutely crazy. And like I said, these similar issues to this occurred. We can verify that from NASA technical reports from the 80s and 90s from the space shuttle RCS. They had similar issues then, all surrounding with Teflon materials and valves and things of that nature. Again, not saying that it's the same problem here, but it is a similar effect here. So yeah, if they can figure out this problem, that only goes into a database to further expand the knowledge on safe design and operations in the future. So that's really not something that can be understated. I'm not doubting NASA ISS ability to support these astronauts, but what about the practical issues like pay workload? Is this crew directly on NASA payroll now on contract workers under, or directly on NASA payroll now, or contract workers under Boeing now? Which part are you talking about? You talking about the astronauts? The astronauts are under salary. I'm sure this is all within their, what do you call it? Their acceptable responsibilities for their role. And now if you're talking about Boeing, I'm sure they're they're definitely Boeing is under contract from NASA, and all the subcontractors are under Boeing, under NASA, essentially. And yeah, I'm sure they're all getting paid. But yeah, can I post another link to a tweet from a few months ago? Great read. Sure, there you go. All right, let's get back to it.
I am encouraged by the dedication and resilience both the NASA and Boeing ground teams and, of course, our space flyers exhibit. I talked with Butch and Sonny both yesterday and today. They support the agency's decision fully, and they're ready to continue this mission on board ISS as members of the Expedition 71 crew. I would also be remiss not to mention that this decision also affects the Crew 9 mission and the astronauts that are assigned to fly in that mission in September. Crew 9 mission will now configure Dragon for 2 crew members and will provide seats for Butch and Sonny to return. We're also working to finalize those crew assignments and update the training plan. Those decisions will be made public once they are finalized. I would again like to thank all the teams who have designed, built, and now fly Starliner. Going forward, their hard work will continue to pave the path for expanded human spaceflight exploration. Thanks.
Thanks, Norm. We'll move into the question and answer portion now.
Pretty good little nuggets of information coming from the panel here. So it's good to know. So a couple kind of like big things that I think we're hearing for the first time. One, we got a confirmation on what the actual review process was for making this decision. Essentially, NASA basically created a panel of experts from heads of the different spaceflight organizations, or I should say the spaceflight centers from NASA, and then basically sent out a poll survey and had all these different opinions, and then they, the majority won, essentially, or at least the, based on what the experts gave in their reviews of the situation, NASA made the decision from there to not fly Butch and Sonny home on the Starliner capsule. Another big one is we learned who the valve manufacturer actually is. It's Moog. Pretty much could have told you that. Moog is a massive prime contractor for space components, propulsion system components. But I wasn't sure if it was actually Aerojet Rocketdyne that actually made those valves, or if they subcontracted and bought valves from somebody else. We learned that somebody else was Moog, so interesting there. Not that that means anything, but it just kind of shows you the tree of where these components are coming from. Essentially, Moog gives the valve to Aerojet Rocketdyne. Aerojet Rocketdyne creates the thruster block, and then that thruster block goes to into Boeing for the capsule, and then the capsule to NASA, right? That sort of thing. And then we also learned basically what the operations are from the ISS. So there's going to be some different... This is the unfortunate part. Starliner will be coming back in a different operational capacity and in a different configuration than what it's contracted for astronauts. So I think we learned that the Starliner capsule will not be doing the same departure process from the ISS as it would with crew on board, which could mean that depending on what NASA thinks about that, they might require another flight test before NASA starts paying for commercially operated missions for Boeing. And then finally, we got some good tidbits of information there regarding essentially just what is going on behind the scenes with Starliner and with Boeing. So I'm happy to see all this culminate, and let's get into the Q&A now. I'm just confused about this administrative aspects of private crews for private companies needing to fill time doing public work on the public platform. Who's my boss? Yeah, I see. Actually, it's actually, when you look at the contracting, and if you're familiar with the way this works, it's actually pretty, I guess, straightforward. NASA astronauts are beholden to NASA, but when they're operating the vehicle under Boeing's property, they follow Boeing, right? Essentially, if you're talking about the engineers developing the vehicle, well, Boeing accepts the requirements to design the vehicle to those requirements from NASA, but at the end of the day, they're still engineers from Boeing beholden to Boeing. So I mean, it's fairly clear and cut and dry in my understanding, in my limited experience with working with NASA. So.
Now we'll open it up again to folks in the room and folks on the phone.
Q&A
if you're
time,
on
chat.
the phone, press *1 to get into the queue. Please clearly state which of our participants you are addressing in your question, and we appreciate you limiting yourself to one question.
We've been through these before, chat, on stream here and in other streams. Just wear your facepalm protection, okay? Just.
So with that, yeah, in the back.
Mark Strassman, CBS News. This could be for Jim or Ken or Steve. I'll let you decide. My question is about trust. In space flight, it's a business that's built on trust. You trust that everyone's going to do their job. You have to have trust in all your space partners. Boeing essentially said, trust us. We have a spacecraft that is ready to return astronauts home. And NASA went in a different direction. So how now do you begin to rebuild that relationship of trust with Boeing?
You know, I'll start. I don't think it's a trust issue at all. I don't think we're rebuilding trust. I think we're looking at the data, and we view the data and the uncertainty that's there differently than Boeing does. It's not a matter of trust. It's our technical expertise and our experience that we have to balance. And I think Ken said it. We balance risk across everything, not just the Starliner piece. So I don't see it as a trust issue at all. I guess Ken or Stitch. Yeah.
Well, I would say that we've had a lot of tense discussions, right? Because the call was close, and so people have emotional investment in either option, and that gives you a healthy discourse. But after that, you have to do some work to keep your team together, right? To keep your team restored and ready for the next issue. And I'll acknowledge that we have some work to do there. It's pretty natural whenever you've had a difficult decision to make. But we're aware of it, and we'll work it. And we're committed to continuing to work with Boeing.
I was so muted during that whole thing. Man, what a bummer. I was so into it, chat, and I usually don't mute myself. Wow. 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 That is embarrassing, chat. Absolutely embarrassing. Anyways, so let me just rewind that whole like minute and a half, 2 minutes. It never happened, chat. Just get it out of your brain. Essentially what I said was great answers. All right, let's get back to it. No, I was just saying that I really liked how both Ken Bowersox, especially how they answered the questions. We heard from one side basically exactly how I thought it was going to be answered, which is it's not a trust issue. It's NASA has our rules for spaceflight. This is our mission. This is how we're going to do our mission, whether or not Boeing believes in their vehicle. And even if their vehicle says, hey, we can fulfill your mission, it's, you know, the data says it's fine. NASA it has the rights to the mission at the end of the day. That was like 4 minutes. No, was it? Okay. It was like maybe 30 seconds. Like I said, get it out of your mind. Okay. Get it out of your mind. And then what was really awesome was Ken Bowersox's response. He was talking about that whole review panel process that we were talking about earlier. And essentially was talking about how there is one thing that they have to do, which is manage everyone's emotional response. At the end of the day, going back to Atkins' laws of spacecraft design, your opinion means nothing. Back it up with data. Engineering is a data-driven process, and you know you got to check your emotions and opinions at the door. Starliner clearly, based on their tests and review of data, believes that they can fulfill the mission from here on out. But at the end of the day, NASA, I'm sure NASA has proponents on both sides, and but right, you go with what the experts say and what the majority says, and you try to respect everyone's opinions. And that's what Ken was saying, that they have to make sure that they manage everyone's emotions and keep with the data-driven process. It felt like 4 hours. Y'all are the worst, okay? Like, I know I made a mistake, but you don't have to kick me while I'm down, chat. But anyways, let's get back to the thing, okay?
Steve, anything you want to add?
Yeah,
I'm not muting myself.
Necessarily call it trust. I would call it a technical disagreement where we get a group of engineers together and they disagree on the risk level of what could potentially happen to the thrusters. Boeing did a great job building a model. Now, the question is that model good enough to predict performance for a crew? All the work we've done is really important also for bringing this vehicle back. We want the vehicle to come back uncrewed. It needs to land at the White Sands Space Harbor, which is where the opportunities are setting up in September.
Probably Uncle Bill.
And all the work that we've done, both on the NASA and Boeing side, give us confidence to bring the vehicle back. It has to execute a deorbit burn. It has to do all the things we need it to do, undocking from the space station safely. So I think together we have worked toward that part. There's just a little disagreement in terms of the level of risk. And that's kind of where it got down to. And I would say, you know, it's close.
Here's the thing. I'm not muted, right? Whew. Okay. Here's the thing about risk assessment. Believe it or not, it's a quantitative analysis mixed with a qualitative analysis. So it's quantitative, and generally speaking, in a very broad sense, how you do risk assessment is you basically list out all the different possible risks, right? Say, like, you know, Starliner impacts ISS after thruster misfires. You know, like that's a risk. You go down the list of every single risk possibility in a situation like this, and then you give it a score on likelihood and consequence. And there can be other factors as well. And likelihood, for example, could be like 1 being like most likely never going to happen, all the way up to 5, which is going to be like 95% chance of happening, right? So 1 through 5 on likelihood scale, and then also on the consequence. 1 being no consequence to mission, doesn't matter, right? On the other hand, you could also have a consequence of 5, which means like total mission failure, right? So yes, in that sense, it's quantitative. You have your risk description, you have your likelihood score, and you either add or multiply the two together to then get your overall risk assessment, right? So it's quantitative in that approach, but also it's qualitative by whatever review board or engineers are actually performing that, right? Because they, you know, one engineer might see Starliner impacting ISS as, you know, a 1 on likelihood and a 5 on consequence, whereas the next engineer might look at that and look at the data and be like, you know what, that's like a 3 on the likelihood and a 5 on the consequence. And so now your difference in your scale is between 5 and 15 in terms of the overall score, and that's a huge difference, right? So that's kind of what he, I think, is talking about here. When you're doing this risk assessment, it's quantitative in terms of certain aspects, but it's also qualitative. The Boeing engineers could be slightly biased in their direction and saying, hey, our risk assessment falls within acceptable levels, and then Boeing looks at it and says like, we're going to shy away from this and be more conservative than you, and we see that we actually fall outside of our levels. So it's kind of like that, I think, is what we're getting at.
It's very close, and it just depends on how you evaluate the risk. We did it a little
how you
differently
evaluate
with our crew than Boeing did. So.
Yep.
And
That's
Mark, trust is a two-way street, and it's built upon a relationship.
Over-putting.
And I think, as indicated just an hour ago by the new CEO of Boeing, that they intend to move forward and fly.
I do have to say that was, not comforting, but it was good to see the CEO and Boeing actually putting out a statement saying we're committed to Starliner, right? I mean, because it could very well be, words nowadays unfortunately don't have the gravity behind them like they used to. But generally speaking, seeing that, it'd be a really hard take if Boeing was all of a sudden they get the capsule back and says like, okay, we're pulling ourselves from the contract. That would be doomed to Boeing. Let me tell you what. But it's good to see, just an official statement from the CEO saying we're committed to Starliner.
Starliner in the future, which is very important to NASA, that we have 2 human-rated vehicles. I think you should understand the trust is 2 ways.
Eric Berger with Ars Technica. 2 questions. One for the administrator, just to follow up.
That was Eric Berger, right?
Trust is 2 ways.
Eric Berger.
Technica. 2 questions. One for the administrator, just to follow up on that question about Boeing and your discussion with the Boeing CEO, Kelly Ortberg. How do you anticipate that NASA can help Boeing get Starliner operational missions? Could you maybe fly like a cargo mission to support that, or just curious what your thoughts are on that? And then for, I think, Ken Bowersox, curious, when did you think it was likely that Crew Dragon would be the vehicle to bring the crew home, Butch and Sonny? From the outside, it does seem like that you saw something perhaps in the White Sands test data that gave you concern. It certainly seemed like that's when the odds seemed to shift toward Dragon. Would love any insights on that.
Good questions from Eric. I like them.
Your question to me is best answered by the people that are going to determine the specific testing and what is required before the crew would fly.
Yeah, I can take a cut at that, Eric. So we're going to sit down with Boeing and kind of lay out what's that path, right? I would say the White Sands testing did give us a surprise. We saw in that testing, as we did 5 total simulations with that thruster of a downhill deorbit burn sequence. And so that's when we saw this swelling of the poppet on the oxidizer side. In other words, a piece of Teflon that swells up and it gets in the flow path and causes the oxidizer to not go into the thruster the way it needs to go into. And that's what caused the degradation in thrust. When we saw that, I think that's when things changed a bit for us, in that now we know that's prevalent, and where is it prevalent in other thrusters?
So they were able to recreate it.
Swelling do in the future. So that's, I think, where we change course. What we have to do now moving forward.
So they were able to recreate it at White Sands. So not in space, which is a key element here. So it is reproducible, and apparently it was reproducible in a way that was common for them to see it happening often as a common occurrence, which is not great. When did these tests happen? A couple months ago, or not a couple months ago? Well, I guess a couple months ago now, right? Because the vehicle was launched in June. They knew about the June 5th. I think they knew about the thruster issues about 48 hours later or 24 hours later when they were approaching the ISS, especially. And so from there, they would have launched the investigation. So I don't know specifically when, but it's been within like the last, I think, at least month. 2-3 weeks ago, could be.
For Starliner 1 is how do we avoid firing that thruster in a manner that would cause the heating, that causes that oxidizer poppet Teflon piece to swell? Can we figure out how to do that with some testing? And can we also have learned recently that the environment in the doghouse, and I think I've talked about this, is hotter than we thought. In other words, when the other thrusters fire in a doghouse, some of that heat soaks back into an individual thruster, and that causes the Teflon to swell. It also causes some vaporization of the propellant. So is there a way we can figure out how to get the doghouse cooler overall? And then thirdly, we see crosstalk sometimes when an OMAC, the orbital maneuvering engine, the big 1,500-pound thruster fires, it then causes heat on one of the adjacent thrusters. So we've got to sit down and go through all those details with Boeing.
Oh man, that scared the bejesus out of me for a second. When he mentioned crosstalk, I'm an embedded systems engineer. I'm a flight software guy. So when he's talking about, usually you talk about crosstalk between electronics, as in like, especially like for radio frequency, where you can have you're trying to command this component, but this component fires as well. Like crosstalk, like actual commanding is being dispersed not as it should. I thought that's what he was talking about, saying that, you know, the wiring or the EMI, EMC, electromagnetic interference and compatibility was not good on the vehicle. That's bad. That would be very bad. But it sounds like he was just talking about the heat soak issue, crosstalk, meaning that the heat flux from one thruster firing was soaking into the other thruster, giving it a higher temperature during its firing, creating the swelling. But okay, I'm good. We're good, chat. I blacked out for a second there, but I think we're okay.
With Aerojet, the teams have been so focused over the last couple months at understanding the physics and what's going on, which we have a much better understanding of that now. Now that we have that understanding of the physics, I think we can move forward and start to find mitigations for future flights.
Yeah, so having any spacecraft, especially one that creates heat, just like a CPU, right? When you have your processor in your computer, you have to make sure you have a good enough cooling tower because your computer, right, is usually in an enclosure. Same thing happening here with the thrusters on the actual Starliner. Because if we look at Starliner, actually get a picture of Starliner to show you guys. And I know I've showed this before, but yeah, let's just go ahead and get this one out. Oh, come on, where is it? I hate it when it like tells you, here's a picture of it, and then it doesn't actually show you the picture on the page. Open image. Thank you. All right, so here's Starliner, right? The thrusters in question are inside of this housing. So you can see two thrusters here. There's two thrusters on the bottom. There's usually one on each side, and then there's one here for rotation. All of these for rotation and attitude control. So when you have an enclosure like this, of course, when you have a thruster, especially depending on its duty cycle, how fast it's pulsing with thrust, you know, you're heating that nozzle up to several hundred degrees centigrade. And then, of course, that can then be enclosed in this box. And then your thrusters, if you actually look at the doghouse, they call them doghouses, by the way. If you actually look at it, yeah, great shot. Oh, this is a great shot. Look at this. Heck yes. Yeah, great shot. So this is what the doghouse looks like. Oh, come on, Reddit, really? Is it really going to do that to me? I just want the picture. Please. It's such a great shot, too. Man, how do you just see the picture without it being on Reddit? That's frustrating. Okay, that might be good enough. Okay, so this is what the inside of the doghouse looks like. And so my mistake, there's actually three large thrusters on the bottom with two smaller thrusters. These are basically attitude control. These are known as the OMACs, basically the orbital maneuvering and attitude control system. So these larger thrusters are generally speaking for like moving between orbits, very large thrust in comparison to the smaller ones, which are basically used for attitude control. And so you can see here very clearly, especially as the large ones fire, as he was saying, can definitely cause some heat to soak back into the thrusters that are right next to it. And then look at all of the electronics in here as well, a very enclosed space, and then the vacuum, right? In the vacuum of space, there's no air for convection, so you have to worry about radiation cooling. And then, of course, in an enclosed space, you're just heat soaking the entire environment. So definitely interesting to see this problem play out. And as you can see it from this image, it's almost like, well, yeah, it's kind of understandable that they're having some of these issues. But yeah, super interesting to get more info on that. Yeah, naps, exactly. Do they have the same setup on both sides? Yeah, so there is some variability in the dog houses, but for the most part, it's the same. Like in terms of the variability, I think like a couple of them have thrusters on the opposite side, because I think they have one on the right for attitude control, or they have two that have one thruster facing right, and then they have two with one thruster facing left. But I think for the most part, they're all the same otherwise. I could be wrong on that. Leak a little hydrogen in there for some cooling. Yeah, perfect. Great idea. They had 3 large thrusters and 2 similar, smaller on the forward aft sections of the doghouse. Yeah. So like I said, they definitely can see why. You can easily see why, but at the same time, their thermal models and their material models and things like that showed that this would have been fine. So somewhere things deviated.
If Ken has anything to add.
Well, for me, the White Sands results I thought were a gift. It was just great to have that data. And I really thought it might help us convert. I've seen it with a few of our discussions where we have people in different camps on a risk decision. We gather more data, and then a piece of data comes in, and we come together, and everybody agrees that we take one path or the other. And I thought we might get there until probably about a week ago, I'd say.
There you go.
That's where it started looking like, hey, I just don't think we'll get there in time for bringing Starliner home in a timely manner.
But why?
With more time, we might have gotten a lot smarter, but we're just at the point where we need to bring Starliner home, take all the data we can, and keep moving forward, I think.
I do really, so like, we're getting, or at least maybe it's just me, I'm not sure. It seems like we're getting a little conflicting information here. One, we heard from, so from one end we heard that the White Sands test data basically definitively saw this being bad, that the Teflon seals were swelling after, excessive firing and things like that. And so it seemed like the other guy made it seem like, this was pretty definitive after getting the White Sands data. And now from Ken Bowersox here, he's kind of saying like, we thought it was going to be unanimous, but it wasn't there yet. So that's interesting. I wonder what else the White Sands testing showed.
Next question is from Marcia Dunn on the phone lines. Marcia Dunn from Associated Press.
Yes, hi. For you, Ken, I'd like a little more information on how the opinions were split. Was it 50-50,
maybe
75 to 25% in favor of SpaceX? If you could just characterize the numbers for and against, and also if you could discuss the mood in the room today. Thank you.
The polling was unanimous amongst all the NASA folks. Boeing expressed the ability to either work crewed or uncrewed. They believe in their vehicle, and they'd be willing to bring a crew home on it. We had some NASA folks that took a broader view of the global risks, who thought that, hey, we probably should keep the crew on the test flight. To say whether that was 15, 20% of the people, I'd have a hard time coming up with that number. But as far as the mood, all of us really wanted to complete the test flight with crew, and I think unanimously we're disappointed not to be able to do that. But that's part of the reason our system is set up the way it is, right? You don't want that disappointment to weigh unhealthily in your decision. And so on purpose, our system increases the volume on some of our voices from the technical authorities, folks that are asked not to think about those emotions, and it helps to pull you away from the fact that you might be disappointed in a certain decision, and then guide you towards that final outcome.
Data-driven process, chat.
And I would add on the mood in the room, you know, I think everybody is professional and did their jobs, but there is a sense of not accomplishing the mission that we set out to do. And even for myself personally, that is a hard thing to go through. It's a little bit of a situation of loss and feeling like you lost something. And we haven't, in the ultimate long-term view, we have not lost anything, because Boeing, as the Administrator Nelson said, is committed to finding the solutions and flying Starliner again. But I probably can't express in words what it's like when you commit to a mission, you've worked on a mission so long, and then we make a fairly dramatic change, which we have not done in human spaceflight in a long time. And so there's a feeling of loss, and we'll work with our team to make sure we talk about that and we move forward from here, because we need this team to focus not only on returning Starliner safely, but we have a Crew 8 mission to return and reconfigure. We have a Crew 9 launch coming up as well, and we need to focus on all those things. We have a really busy time frame, and we'll do that. We'll talk to the team and make sure they understand that it's nobody's fault, and it's a normal feeling to have this feeling of loss, or that you didn't complete what you intended to do.
I don't really understand what everyone's like. I saw this all on X today as well, Twitter's today as well. Everyone's obsession with wanting to know the vote, if you will, the result, like the specific votes, like the percent votes, the specific divisions between those in favor and against going with Starliner. It's a I guess that's just weird to me. But anyways.
Okay, we'll take the next question.
It's not the first
also
time
from
I've
the
heard
phone
that.
lines from Marissa Para from NBC News.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for doing this. Marissa Para with NBC here. Senator Nelson, this could be for you or for anyone else who wants to join in. We heard a mention of a next space flight for Starliner a couple of times, and we know how much NASA would like to have an alternative to SpaceX, more companies available to provide the ability to shuttle astronauts to the ISS. Senator Nelson, how certain are you that Boeing will ever launch Starliner with a crew on board again?
100%.
Yeah, they're contracted to.
100%.
Correct.
There is no shadow of a doubt in your mind. Can you explain why?
Because of what this panel has already told you. The extensive cooperative working relationship between NASA and Boeing, of finding the problem, but knowing that the uncertainties are what held up the crew getting on Starliner to go home, and a certainty on my part that we will find out the uncertainty, and Boeing's willingness to carry through on this program.
All right, next question from the
Good
phones,
answer.
Kristen Fisher
Simple,
from CNN.
straightforward.
Thank you. My question is also for Senator Nelson. Senator, you were a member of the congressional committee that investigated the Challenger accident. You were a senator when Columbia happened. How much did that experience influence your personal decision today? Thank you.
Well, very much. It has affected the decision today by this collective group and all of those that participated.
It all builds upon lessons
in
learned.
the flight test readiness review this morning. It is a trying to turn around the culture that first led to the loss of Challenger and then led to the loss of Columbia.
We've talked about that here on stream a lot.
Where obvious mistakes were not being brought forth. For example, give you specifics going back to the loss of Challenger.
They had seen
Even
it before.
the engineers in Utah, in Morton Thiokol, were begging their management not to launch because of the cold weather. And that information never got up. And that was happening on the very night before the launch the next morning. Another example, on Columbia, astronauts would get through with their flights and they'd inspect the orbiter, and they'd, as a matter of fact, my commander, Hoot Gibson, said he'd look at subsequent flights and he would look like that a shotgun had been shot on the delicate silicon tiles because of so much of the foam shedding off of the external tank. But there was a culture that did not bring that information up to the decision makers. So NASA ever since has tried very hard to bring about an atmosphere in which people are encouraged to step forward and speak their mind. And I think Right Today is a good example of that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do we have other questions in the room? Yep, back left.
You disagree with that element? See something, say something? Yeah. I mean, I definitely still think NASA has issues in that department. I mean, it's hard to manage hundreds of thousands of engineers in different groups and different organizations across your organization, your agency. Yeah. What you think, Element? You responded with bull after hearing Nelson. I will go back though, and I will die on this hill. I still think safety is not the core value that should be at NASA. It should be reliability first, and then when you can't make something reliable, make it safe. That sort of thing, you know? Because like I said, you can make a unreliable system safe, or if you make a reliable system, you inherently make it safe. But yeah, having the core value of safety is, in my opinion, I mean, it might just be a game of semantics, but I think if this test flight was uncrewed, I would be totally fine with this result. That is how testing works. Yeah, and again, I really wish somebody would ask, because I feel like we've heard this little tidbit of information before, but it's gotten lost or whatever, that we have seen the thruster issues before. On the last flight test, the last uncrewed demonstration of the Starliner system, that we've seen this problem. We have seen thrusters fail in orbit. Now, again, I would love confirmation of that, because I feel like it was definitely said at some point somewhere, and then it doesn't seem to have ever been brought up since then. So either it was a fever dream of mine, or we actually did get that information and nothing has come from it since then. So, because like if we have seen this problem before, I don't understand how we're doing this mission having had seen that problem and apparently not rectifying that problem. So yeah, that's my one stickler, is that it is based on that premise. People brought it forward, it was just ignored. Are you talking about Starliner here? Or are you talking about the space shuttle stuff? I think the mission should be the priority. In most cases, that means prioritizing safety. Well, in terms of the mission, yes, but I'm talking about in terms of like the mentality for like design and operations, like especially like vehicle design. I feel like it should be reliability over safety. You can have reliability, safety, but yeah, I understand that carrying out missions, safety should be the number one for sure, 100%. I was just talking about the system design mentality. Or they misattributed the issue to something else that they think they corrected to, but obviously they didn't hit the mark. I recall there was something with the previous uncrewed mission. Yeah. They told me they fixed it. Yeah. Oh, with the shuttle. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Gotcha.
Good morning. Cheryl Mercedes here with KHOU here in Houston, Texas. Any of you can answer this question. Just really simply state it to the folks at home who have no idea what these two astronauts are experiencing right now up in orbit. All they're hearing is the technical stuff and what we're reporting. What do you have to say to those folks who are saying, man, these guys simply are going to miss out on the holidays with their families at home? What's it like for them up there? What are they experiencing day to day now with this decision and this news that it will now be months before they return? Thank you.
I'll jump in on this one. First off, all the astronauts on station are professionals. All those qualities I talked about with Butch and Sonny, that's exemplified in every astronaut that flies to the International Space Station. They're professionals.
I would have responded with like, yeah, that sucks, but they already knew that. They already knew the possibility of this. I mean, you could ask the same question about the astronauts that are going to be on the ISS during Christmas and all the other holidays already scheduled. Like, yeah, Butch and Sonny was supposed to only be up for 8 days, and now it'll be 8 months. But it's like, yeah, that sucks. But this was a flight test, and their flight test pilots, or whatever you want to call them, like that they know the inherent risks involved.
When they launch, they know that there are circumstances where they can be on board.
They're in space
for up to a year. So mentally, you know that you could be in that situation. Now, once you're in the arena, obviously, it's a little different. It's challenging. It's disappointing that they're not coming home on Starliner, but that's okay. It's a test flight. That's what we do. They knew those risks going in, but we keep them very busy. There's a lot of science and research going on the International Space Station that Dana can elaborate on and has elaborated on. We keep them busy, we keep them working, and they are continuing to pave the road for human exploration going forward. So it's great. They're part of the crew, and they're doing fine.
What do you say to their families?
I care deeply about their families. I know this is a huge impact to their families, and it means a lot. Their families are the pillars that keep them strong. They're the pillars that we...
yeah, that's actually a good point as well. Like, this decision is technically being made out of an abundance of safety to them. So I'd like to think that the families would understand that and would rather see them home safely than taking unwarranted risks, right? Like, that's the other part. You got to talk from both the astronaut side and the family side. The astronauts knew that this could be a possibility. It's a test flight, right? Anything could happen. They knew the risks. And then from the family side, I hope they understand as well that this is part of mom and dad's job, right? Like, for sure.
At NASA depend on for the workforce to keep us going. Resilience, and that's both at NASA and Boeing. So family is the backbone to allow NASA and our commercial partners to do what we do to explore space.
Right. We're going to go back to the phone lines. Next is Eben Brown from Fox News.
Hi, good afternoon. Eben Brown, Fox News for Administrator Nelson. Sir, I can appreciate all the technical and R&D review here that's being detailed for us, and the investment everyone has in this. But I'd like to ask you about the investment we as taxpayers have given to Boeing over, I think it's at least 15 years now, it's been hundreds of millions from seed money to selecting them as providers for commercial crew. At what point, and I understand this is an oversight issue and it may come from something above the agency, but your career has spanned both the agency and above the agency, and I want to know how or when or what's the process for reviewing this contract to determine we're not getting what we paid for as taxpayers. I say this as knowing that there is a public sentiment that is very skeptical of Boeing as a corporation right now, not just due to this, but also due to their other issues in commercial aviation. So I'd like to know when those discussions happen and how they happen and what gets discussed.
To specifically answer your question, you remember when we started the commercial program, one of the advantages of the commercial program was that it was going to be a fixed price contract. So much of NASA's research and development in a very unforgiving environment space that is very...
Real quick, though, just to kind of shorten it. If that was to ever come, I'm pretty sure first and foremost, NASA would actually ask Boeing to fly it again on their own dime. Boeing has already done that, right? After OFT-1 had its spectacular failure, Boeing fit their own pocket of however much money it was, several $100 million to fly the next mission without NASA involvement, right? Or, well, not without NASA involvement, without NASA paying for the mission. So like that was all paid out of pocket from Boeing. So Boeing, I'm pretty sure, would just do that again, or it would be Boeing's decision to pull out of the contract if they didn't want to pursue that anymore. I don't know exactly how the contract is structured. If Boeing can actually do that, I'm sure they can. But under what circumstances, I don't know. I don't think it would just be NASA being like, yeah, sorry, you're too expensive, or, you know, too many problems at too much expense. Like, I think they would just ask for Boeing to contribute more of their own money. Let's see. Hellfish said, with Boeing not present at the conference, I have a silly theory as to why. Perhaps there was a vote to fly the crew home on Starliner, and NASA higher up straight up said no. Well, that seems to be definitely prevalent, but I still don't see that as being a reason for Boeing to not be on the conference, because NASA's already addressed that Boeing, yes, is confident in their vehicle to be able to perform. They even said it. Boeing said they could perform either option, either return crew home or come back autonomously. So I don't see Boeing having a dissenting opinion on this decision as being reason for them to not be on the call. I mean, maybe that's just my purview. Clearly, Boeing thinks that no official Boeing PR on these press conferences is best PR for them, because I'm sure they would get absolutely bombarded with the stupidest of questions from every media outlet, right? Like they'd be like, why are you failing? Why are you failing? What are all these problems? Is it a, you know, internal problem? You know, they would be bombarded. So I'm sure that's probably why. But I would like to think it's not just because they have a dissenting opinion from NASA, because that, you know, should not be the case. But anyways, I mean, that should not be the reason. But anyways, I kind of have a feeling that Boeing pulling the plug is a real option. I think it's always a real option. I mean, look at Maxar Space pulling out of the OSAM and the RSGS contracts. They were getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a in-space autonomous servicing vehicle for a technology demonstrator for the DoD as well as NASA. And, you know, 3 years into the program or whatever it was, they pulled from the contract. Like, it's totally something that they can do. But Boeing CEO has said that they are committed to Starliner, and Starliner is also officially integrated into architectures for the future LEO destination project, the commercial LEO destinations program, basically for Orbital Reef and for Lockheed Martin Nanoracks space station and things like that. They have renders of using Starliner with that system. So I think Boeing, at least if they can get this system working, has a potential commercialization path. So I think it could still be a money value add to the Boeing company still, even now. But yeah, if they pull out of the contract, can you imagine? That would be the end of, I feel like that would be the end of Boeing. After your CEO comes out and says they're committed to Starliner, you pull from it, like, ooh boy, that'd be a 180. That would be the worst light.
Very hard, and it's cutting edge technology, and it is very expensive.
Yeah, WISP, exactly.
And as a result, on the normal way of contracting, cost plus, it will run the cost way up. Not so with the commercial crew program. And that was part of the negotiation for both of the companies, Boeing and SpaceX. And they've got a fixed price. And if you check the record, you can find out how much additional Boeing has had to spend. So my answer, you're posturing the question of what I would answer in front of a congressional committee about the cost, is that this program is working like it should. Now, if your question portends something else, then speak it. But
Over
I think that's what
$288
you were
million
getting at.
loss on Starliner for Boeing. Boeing's been fitting the bill for the last mission,
We'll
so
go to Joey Roulette from
288
Reuters.
million.
Thanks.
And they've only taken 1.6 billion out of a $4 billion contract, if my memory serves. Right, because it's basically they got so much money to develop Starliner, so much money for developing the Starliners for the demonstration missions, and then so much money for how many flights? Four flights? 4 commercial flights before a renewal contract could be in place, or maybe it was 6, something like that. But anyways, they've only gotten $1.6 billion payout from NASA as part of this contract because they're only on demonstration mission 3 or 4, right, officially from the original NASA contract, and then they fit the bill for 1 fully. So, yeah.
Bill Nelson, did Kelly Ortberg say when you talked to him whether Boeing would pay for an additional test mission before Starliner gets certified? And for Steve or Ken, I'm reading some contract language from Boeing's most recent modification that says it kind of broadly defines certification as coming after Starliner flies astronauts to and from the ISS.
Ooh.
So I know there's a lot of data that you guys are going to get on the return leg, but since it's coming back empty and based on what we've seen so far, will NASA want to see Boeing fly an additional test mission before it gets its certification, or might NASA change those requirements and certify Starliner anyway?
Good
Joey,
question.
It did not come up, nor would it have been appropriate for in a conversation of which I'm alerting him as to what the decision of the flight test readiness review was, that we would get into those matters.
Yeah, we've started looking at the flight test objectives, what we have already accomplished on this flight and what's remaining. We have not, made a total determination yet of what objectives are in front of us or what we've fulfilled. We'll take a little time to do that. I don't think we have decided on the path yet of another crewed flight test. We have gotten a lot out of this vehicle so far. It's been on orbit now for 2.5 months, which we didn't intend, so we've gotten a lot of data out of that. We'll have to sit down and talk about the certification aspects after the flight. It's a little premature to do that at this point. So.
Yeah, we need to get the vehicle back on the ground and then analyze the data and be driven by that in our next decision. But I wouldn't rule anything out, right? I mean, we have options for how we move forward. The one thing I do want to emphasize is we plan to work together with Boeing to find that path.
Next, we have Chris Davenport from the Washington Post.
So, just real quick though, that was a good question. Not necessarily in the context for what Bill was talking about, because he was asking, did you bring this up to the Boeing CEO during your conversation with him or whoever he was talking to? No, that's not something that would come up out of this. But anyways, it was a good question, learning from the technical guys here about whether or not they would require Boeing to fly another flight test before they would then get into the commercial crew missions, like the actual contracted commercial crew missions. So short answer is they don't know yet, although I do have to say, kind of just listening to the words and the inflections in the voice and whatnot, it kind of sounds like probably, which is interesting. But as Ken said, rule nothing out. We have to look at the data and get the vehicle on the ground and reassess. Like I said, NASA, just because it's in the contract, NASA could waive that requirement, right? It would be an official waive, NASA saying, hey, we understand this is contracted. We waive this requirement for you to then be certified and then get into crew missions. It all depends on the data. But it kind of sounded like maybe leaning more towards maybe yes.
Hi, thanks so much.
That was my takeaway anyways.
I want to follow up on that poll, which you said was unanimous. I wonder if you can give us a number of votes cast that was as part of that poll. Was it like 10-0, 12? How many votes were there? Thank you.
Well, so I'll kind of go through just mentally all the orgs we polled. We unofficially asked the opinion of the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, the Flight Operations Directorate, the Division Director for ISS, and commercial LEO development at NASA headquarters, the ISS program, the Commercial Crew Program, the Engineering Technical Authority, the Crew Health and Medical Technical Authority, Safety and Mission Assurance Technical Authority. Let's see, who else did I leave out? All the center directors from Stennis, Marshall, JSC, and Kennedy Space Center, where the Commercial Crew Program is officially based. Anybody I missed on that list?
I think you got just about everybody. Yeah,
I think, did I get everybody? And that was again, everybody concurred with proceeding uncrewed, and they stated where they might have one or two people during our meeting that had a different opinion, and tried to give those folks an opportunity to talk to the group.
We'll go to Micah Maidenberg from Wall Street Journal.
Is this guy the director of the program? He is the associate administrator for the Space Mission Directorate. Yeah, he's a pretty high guy. He oversees like this program, the Crew Program, several programs. Veteran of NASA for sure, 100% a veteran of NASA. In fact, let's look up his resume. Bower Sox. He was definitely an astronaut. I knew that. I'm pretty sure he flew on the space shuttle. Let's see, Ken Bower Sox. Associate Administrator of NASA Space Operations Mission Directorate. Served as interim chair of the NASA Advisory Council from 2016 to 2017. He is retired U.S. Naval aviator. Also 19 years of experience at NASA. Astronaut Corps in 87. He also has flown 5 times on the space shuttle, serving as pilot, commander, mission specialist, and once on a Roscosmos Soyuz, where he served as a flight engineer during descent during this 5 orbital missions. So yeah, he's flown 211 days in space. Yeah, I would consider him seasoned. He was also a crew member for the first 2 Hubble Space Telescope repair flights. Yeah, I would say he's seasoned, 100%. He's awesome. He's the guy. He's the guy. If you wanted to know who the guy is, he's the guy. Yeah, he is a good manager. I really like Kenneth. I've been following him for a good little while, especially during that 2016-2017 timeframe, and I like him.
Thank you. For Administrator Nelson and Jim Free, there was a discussion on a previous call about Starliner returning uncrewed, if that would count as a loss of mission or mission failure. What is your view on that?
What?
And
What do you say?
if you don't agree, for Administrator Nelson and Jim.
What did you just ask?
For Administrator Nelson and Jim Free, there was a discussion on a previous call about Starliner returning uncrewed, if that would count as a loss of mission or mission failure.
Oh, okay.
What is your view on that? And if you don't agree that it would be a loss of mission or mission failure.
Kind of asked and answered. They already said they have to look at the data and look at the objectives that they did complete and look at what they were able to complete now that Starliner's been 2 months on orbit instead of 8 days. Kind of asked and answered. The reason why I reacted that way is because I thought he was asking like if there was a loss of crew, but no, he was saying, is this a loss of objectives if it's flying uncrewed? But anyways, kind of asked and answered question.
Could you please explain why? Thanks.
Yeah, Mike, I think let me go back to echo something Steve said. We've accomplished a lot on this mission and learned a lot about this vehicle, satisfied a lot of the objectives already. That stressed here by Steve, stressed on previous press conferences.
Partial mission failure.
We'll look at this as we do any of our missions to see, does it fall into any of the categories that we have that we define as a mishap once we get the vehicle back. That's our time to look at that. Yeah. So I think that's a question
asked and answered.
We'll go to Izzy Alvarez from ABC.
Thank you. Can you please tell us in layman terms why NASA chose SpaceX to bring Sunny and Butch home? How did you come to that decision?
I can take a cut at that, and we'll see.
Instead of like Soyuz, or
when we looked at, first of all, we looked at the risk of
because like a couple things here. There's not really another United States space flown vehicle to bring them back, so SpaceX is your go-to if you're not going to get Soyuz. Soyuz can only carry 3, so they would only be able to carry 1 astronaut up and then 3 down. Don't know when that would have to occur with the next Soyuz mission already slated for early next month. And if you're talking about the process in general for selection, we've already been through that. You know, there was a poll. We took all the information from all these director heads of different organizations and departments within NASA and came to this conclusion. So, anyways.
Putting Butch and Sunny on the Starliner vehicle due to the issues with the thrusters that we've talked about.
Toe straps, obviously, yeah.
And so when we looked at that risk, we said that that risk was due to the uncertainties, due to the inability to predict with certainty the thruster performance for the rest of the mission, including holding the orientation of the vehicle for the deorbit burn and then maneuvering the vehicle for the separation of the crew module and the service module. When we came to that conclusion, we started looking at what other options, Dana and I both did, what options do we have, because these missions are really jointly shared between the ISS program and Commercial Crew Program. And as we started looking at various options, it was obvious to both of us that the easiest and best option was to configure the Crew 9 vehicle with a couple empty seats on the way uphill to put ballast in those seats. SpaceX had that capability. We also knew that we had a spacesuit on orbit already that we could utilize for one of the crew members. They've tried that on, and that spacesuit works.
Oh, nice.
Both crew members tried on a spacesuit, so we have a spacesuit now we're going to launch for one of the other crew members on Crew.
Oh, another little tidbit of info, chat. Heck yes. Okay. So why that wasn't divulged before? Okay, but anyway, so we just learned that there is at least a spacesuit that can work with the Dragon. To my understanding, right? They were talking about that there is a spacesuit on board the ISS currently for at least one of the astronauts, either Sunny or Butch, to then interface with Dragon's ECLS system for the return flight. And then because they have their sizing measurements and whatnot, apparently there's a spacesuit on the ground that they could at least use for the other person that they would actually send up as part of this next Dragon Crew 9 mission. So that's good. Yeah.
Crew 9. And then we really wanted to give the crew.
Why aren't they compatible? That was my question too. Like I wish somebody would ask that, as in like, why during your contracting for spacesuits for these vehicles were you not implementing a common interface into ECLS, into both spacecraft's ECLS system? I don't know. I feel like that was definitely something that I feel like should have been, implemented as a requirement, or even if the suits aren't like directly compatible, having like an adapter made, like that seems like a situation that would behoove us to do, but yeah, we'll see. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it all depends on the suit pressure designs and things like that. Like we clearly see there's a difference in the design between Boeing, which is a little bit more like a typical like space flight suit, like pressurized space flight suit, like even the ones that were on the shuttle, and then you see like the really slick one from Starliner or from SpaceX for the Dragon capsule. So if they are meant to operate at different levels and things, like that's one thing. It's not just an interface issue, right? That's a good point to bring up. But still, I feel like there should be something that can be done to make one compatible with the other in an event such as this. But yeah,
crew, a suited return. Like we always have in U.S. space flight. So when we started to weigh all those options, it became very obvious that Crew 9 was the best option. Fly up 2 empty seats, have Butch and Sunny join the increment crew and return on Crew 9. That just became the easiest, the best option, and the most efficient option for all of us. And I'll see if Dana has anything to add.
Yeah,
I can't wait for this chat. I want somebody to ask when they return, when Sunny and Butch return, to ask them which capsule did they like flying in more. Did they like Starliner more, or did they like Dragon more? I want to know. I want to know what do they think about the inside and the manual switches on Starliner versus the touchpad digital version of Dragon. Like two very different spacecraft design implementations there.
I would just add that knowing that this was a test flight, we made the decision a couple of years ago to train and keep Butch and Sunny current with all aspects of station, some of the most complex things.
The one that
spacewalks,
works.
robotics, some of the research. So,
ouch.
We had them trained. They've obviously flown to station before. They've done long duration missions. Both of them have. And so, again, when you line that up with our vehicle options and the fact that the Dragon spacecraft is highly automated, as you all know, we've used it for private astronaut missions. We do have a lot of experience taking people with much less training than what our classic training is for our NASA crew.
Yeah,
and
Polaris.
Having them fly on Dragons.
Polaris is flying on Monday.
Aggregate, it made a lot of
Tuesday.
sense to make the decision
Tuesday early morning
to adjust Crew 9 and have them do a full expedition and come home on a Dragon.
And one thing I'd like to add, a major goal of the commercial crew program is to develop not just the capability to go back and forth to space station, but a generic capability to go back and forth to low Earth orbit to develop a commercial capability. There's two reasons for that. One is dissimilar redundancy, so you have this option where if there's a problem on one vehicle, you might not have the same problem.
There's that buzzword, chat. We say it here, redundant, dissimilar architecture. It's very useful for things like this, because that way you don't have the same problem perpetuated across your entire fleet of vehicles. Can you imagine if we only had Starliner? Then that means that this thruster issue could perpetuate itself on all other vehicles in the fleet. So the only rescue mission would be to send up another broken capsule. So it's good to have multiple vehicles that could do this. Absolutely. But it can also bite you in the butt as well when you have unforeseen circumstances, such as this, where spaceflight suits aren't compatible in between the two. But those things can at least be mitigated.
On another vehicle, so you could use them for a return, or perhaps keep them flying while another vehicle is working through recovery from some sort of a problem. But it's also to provide some competition in the environment.
Crew Dream Chaser, anybody?
And competition is healthy in a lot of ways. It causes you to develop your technology. It causes you to get better pricing, and we would like to have that competition in the future. So that's why we have more than one provider we're trying to develop.
Crew
Next
Dream
question
Chaser,
is from
please.
Kenneth Chang from the New York Times.
Hi, thank you. This is for Administrator Nelson. You expressed confidence that Boeing will continue, but it's also a price contract, so potentially they could lose. They've already written up $1.6 billion. Are you saying that you're confident that they will continue to write off money, losing money on this? And I guess the second question is, has there been any discussion with Sierra Space about converting Dream Chaser for crew? Thank you.
On Sierra, I will let somebody else answer that. With regard to Boeing,
Dream Chaser.
Remember, it's a fixed price contract. We expect delivery on the contract, and therefore,
asked and answered.
There is no in the question that you pose, which is basically that they've spent X, will they spend Y to get to where Boeing Starliner becomes a regular part of our crew rotation. That's not, I don't have the answer to that.
I'll add about Sierra Space.
Here we go,
Sierra's
Dream
working
Chaser.
very hard on their first maiden voyage of the Dream Chaser. That's a cargo mission. They've got the vehicle down at Kennedy, and they're working through test and final assembly. So it's the plan that they fly cargo missions to station through the rest of station. And in fact, that's the scope of the contract that we have with them, to provide cargo capabilities. There is no existing contract with the agency for crewed capability, which doesn't mean that that's not a possibility somewhere in the future. In fact, Sierra has their own goals about moving in that direction in the future. But for now, the work and the focus is on getting them flying as a cargo flight. And if you look back to how we started SpaceX and the Dragons, that's a very similar approach. We started with cargo flights first. We flew a number of flights, and then they eventually evolved into the crewed version of the Dragon.
Next question is from Lauren Grush from Bloomberg.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm wondering, can you walk us through what modifications, if any, will be made to Starliner ahead of its return now that it doesn't have a crew on board, and will NASA be flying that return any differently or watching for anything specifically now that it's performing this return without a crew? Thanks.
Sorry, Hocklicious.
I'll take the question relative to the reconfiguration of Starliner. There's a few things that we have to do
Software
differently.
mainly.
As I said earlier, we're going to modify the separation sequence a little bit to get away from the space station a little quicker than we had planned. So that's one modification. That will be done via ground commanding, and then there'll be some time.
I would like to know if that timing thing is because they want to get away from the station at a faster pace to make sure they don't have thruster issues on those forward-facing thrusters, or on any of the thrusters, right? I'm wondering if that's the reason, or if this is actually do autonomous systems back away from the station faster than crew variants. I'm actually curious about that. Is this like a modification in separation sequence that even Dragon has? Like Dragon backs away, an uncrewed Dragon, like a cargo Dragon, backs away faster from the ISS, faster than the commercial crew Dragons do. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's kind of an interesting. They keep saying that.
Tag the events in the flight software they'll execute. There are a few items in the cockpit that have to be configured a little differently. Obviously, if you had a crew on board, some of the life support systems will be configured, just like we did on the Orbit Flight Test 2 mission in 2022. We'll use those same configurations. Obviously, we've got to do a little bit of planning relative to the center of gravity without the crew members being in the seats. So we've looked at that already, and that doesn't appear to be a big problem.
Isn't it just fascinating, all of the minute details that go into every decision here? They even have to worry. They have to account for the difference in center of mass of the vehicle without the two astronauts on board. And they have to reconfigure the cockpit a little bit in order to account for that. Like, that's something that, talking again about the risks involved with going this alternative Crew 9 route versus just sending astronauts home on Starliner, there are risks involved, right? It's crazy to think of all the small things that have to go into play just to make sure everything works out good in the end.
So we've got a few things like that to go work on. The teams have been really laying out all that data. The ground teams will have a little bit different set of flight rules to operate from. So they'll have that ahead of them. But there's a few minor things to the spacecraft to reconfigure, and we're already in the process of starting that work.
Next question is from Will Robinson-Smith from Spaceflight Now.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Question, I believe, for Dana Weigel or perhaps Steve Stitch. In one of the previous briefings, it was discussed that I think the Russians wanted to see, it was one or two successful full crew rotation missions of Starliner before they would put one of their cosmonauts on the spacecraft. Has the agency had the opportunity to talk to Roscosmos about the path forward and, what the options will be for flying cosmonauts to and from the space station with Starliner at this point? Thank you.
I don't think so.
Sure. Our focus with all the international partners, as you can imagine, discussions about what's happening on board or changing launches or operations on board involve not just our NASA team, but the entire international partnership. And so similar to the discussions you've heard today, the focus has been on the decision immediately in front of us with what to do with Starliner crewed or uncrewed. And in fact,
the crew home.
When we ended
Starliner
the review today, I sent an email out to all of the program managers across the international partnership so they understood the decision. So they've been following along with us. And flying on the Boeing vehicle, they have always maintained that they want to see a few successful flights before they fly crew on it. I don't expect that that'll change, but we're not actively having those discussions right now.
Next question from Irene Klotz at Aviation Week.
Thanks very much. I think this is for Steve. As far as the thruster issues, considering the return of the spacecraft and the performance during OFT 1 and 2, is the primary concern now that because there was the overheating during the approach to station that there's some uncertainty on how these thrusters are now going to perform during the deorbit? And can you also just give us an update on what the status is on Boeing's preparations to return Starliner without crew, and what, if any, additional risks to the spacecraft are, and granted those are far below risks to crew, but if there are any additional risks at this point in bringing Starliner back uncrewed, since that's not the nominal plan.
Why do all of these journalists have to like put their question into a complex context? Like just ask the quick question. It's just like run on sentences. Oh, just the message gets lost. I had a hard time trying to follow that there.
Plan. Thanks.
Yeah, good questions, Irene. What I would say is that the thrusters on this flight relative to Orbit Flight Test 2
I'm not sure
have experienced higher heating. We had more thrusters fail off, more thrusters see degradation. In fact, one of them failed off, and we haven't hot fired that. We did 2 docked hot fires at ISS, and we've chosen not to utilize that thruster at all. But they've experienced a little more stress, I would say, than the previous flight, even though the deorbit burn was successful on OFT, the first orbit flight test and the second one. These thrusters have experienced more stress, more heating, and so there's a little bit more concern for how they would perform during the deorbit burn, holding the orientation of the vehicle, and then also the maneuvers required after that. We've also learned in the starboard doghouse in particular, there is extra heating that we have just discovered in the last 2 weeks.
Starboard,
and looking at the data a little more closely, anytime an orbital maneuvering thruster fires in that doghouse, there's higher heating. And so we had 1 thruster on OFT2 in 2022 fail off after the deorbit burn.
What did you just say?
There's higher heating, and so we had 1 thruster on OFT2 in 2022 fail off after the deorbit burn. It would not surprise me to see one of the starboard aft thrusters in that doghouse fail off in the deorbit burn for this flight. So I would say a little higher heating, a little bit more thermal, and a little more uncertainty now that we understand.
Why isn't this information part of the typical debrief that we get at the front end of the press conference? We get all of these little tidbits of information in the Q&A. It would be great to get it all in one go. For example, they apparently figured out that the astronauts can have suits on board Starliner. That was a question from the last press conference, and we learned that through some random Q&A. Now we know, we just confirmed it right there, that they did see similar issues on OFT2 2 years ago. So why, if they saw similar issues 2 years ago, are we seeing the same? Well, we don't know if it's the same issue, I guess, yet, but like, if they saw this problem before, what was the remedy to try and mitigate these problems for this flight? Why wasn't this part of the debriefing at the beginning, saying, oh yeah, so we've seen this before, tell us, maybe we don't know what it is yet, like maybe they didn't see the correlation yet, and now there's a clear correlation because multiple thrusters are now failing. Like maybe they saw it as like a one-off system sort of thing, but it's just
understand the physics a little bit better for a crew return. In terms of the preps of the vehicle, we've been getting the vehicle.
That one seems kind of prevalent, though, Toaster.
The team is on the ground, really has gone through and looked at the flight software that's on board. Is there any changes that need to be made to mission data loads? This technique of using a very simplified subsequence has minimized the changes required on mission data loads. They're going to take the actual software that we plan to use and put it through its paces in the facility that's a hardware software integration facility that Boeing has. The team has been doing practice runs in a training facility. When I say the team, the ground team has been doing runs just to make sure they understand the differences between the uncrewed and uncrewed. And really, I think it's, I would say, unconnecting muscle memory almost. If you've been training for 2 years to do things a certain way with the flight control team on the ground, with the crew on board, where you can make calls to the crew to do certain actions, they now have to take those actions. And so they've been doing those practices. And there's an integrated simulation next week on Wednesday with the ISS flight control team. The undock sequence is always an orchestrated series of events between how ISS gets configured, how we depress the interface between Starliner and the ISS, how we configure the guidance navigation control for the space station and the software. And so they're going to do that integrated practice next Wednesday. And we'll take our time. If that goes well, we'll pick an undock date. And if it doesn't, we need more simulations, we'll go ahead and pivot. We've laid out a schedule that allows us the opportunity to have some flexibility in Starliner undock, and that's been very important for Dana and I.
Next question is from Jeff Faust from Space News.
Hey, Jeff.
Good afternoon. Question for Ken Bowersox or Steve Stitch. You mentioned earlier in the briefing that it was a very close decision on deciding to bring back Starliner uncrewed. I'm wondering if you can quantify that in some way. Was there some particular piece of data or missing piece of data that really swayed that decision, that very close decision? Thank you.
So I'll give it from my point of view, the answer, and then Steve can weigh in. If you look at it, we knew going in that the crewed flight test was probably a little higher risk than a typical rotation with Dragon, where we've flown multiple flights. That's why we called it a flight test, right? We had the issues coming uphill, and that raised our risk level and our uncertainty in how much more risk there was. Anytime you change from your nominal plan that you've spent years developing, you increase risk on the other side. And the type of risks I'm talking about are something that we've analyzed for contingency return with the crew on the middeck of the Dragon, or the necessity of sending up new suits where the crews weren't able to try out the pressure suits on the ground so that they would have suits on the Dragon. Those types of things raise your risk a little bit on that side. And so now both of your risk levels have gone up, and you knew going in that one was a little bit higher, and you've got uncertainty on just where it fits. So you have to really dig in to understand what the baseline risk change is. And that's what the team has been working so hard this last couple of months. For me, one of the really important factors is that we just don't know how much we can use the thrusters on the way back home before we encounter a problem.
So I wonder if that right there is why they are having Starliner back away from the ISS in a faster sequence than they otherwise would have. Because, right, we were just talking about a second ago that Starliner, one of their things they're modifying on Starliner before it undocks uncrewed, is they're changing the separation sequence, having it go faster away from the ISS, basically doing the burns at a shorter time interval than they would have had crew been on board. I'm wondering if that's the reason right there, is they don't know how long they're going to have the thrusters operational because of that whole heat soak issue. So they're trying to get it away from the station faster than otherwise. So that's interesting. That could be the link there. And then the other part of what he was saying is what we were talking about, a few minutes ago, which is, tying that into the whole Boeing versus NASA, right? We've heard from Boeing official statements saying that they wanted to fly Butch and Sunny home on Starliner, and we got today that NASA was like, no, we're not going to do that. Even though there is a quantitative process on evaluating risk for any system, that evaluation process is still somewhat qualitative, because it's all revolving around the perceived likelihood and consequence of each and every risk. That's what we were talking about a second ago, right? When you look at a risk, an engineer is going to look at what is the likelihood of that risk occurring, and then what is the actual probability of consequence for that risk occurring. Like, in terms of consequence, if it fails, is it going to be catastrophic to the mission, or is it only going to be impactful to the mission? Like those sorts of grading criteria, right? And so each engineer that looks at a risk, it might grade them differently. So Boeing performed their risk assessment and said, hey, we fall within your, maximum allotted risk value. And then Boeing looked at it with their engineers and said, well, actually, we're more conservative than you are, and we show that you're violating our maximum risk assessment. So I think that's kind of how we can bring it all together there. Pretty good answer, or pretty good information coming from Ken here.
Because of the heating effects that happened on the way uphill. But Steve can tell you a lot more.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'll just mention a couple things. One, we had
any more
some
tidbits?
thruster experts come in and talk to us a few weeks ago, and we are clearly operating this thruster at a higher temperature at times than it was designed for. I think that was a factor that, as we started to look at the data a little bit more carefully,
is it your duty cycle?
The thruster outside of where it should be operated in.
You firing them too quickly?
Understanding, could a thruster just fail off gracefully, or could there be another failure mode that is not so graceful? I think that was an important factor as we talked about the
so graceful explosion.
I mentioned the starboard doghouse, and so for some reason the heating is higher in that starboard doghouse that we do not understand. When an OMAC thruster fires, the other thrusters get heated at a much higher rate than we expected. We don't have a closed loop model to predict the performance. We worked very hard of trying to anchor a model based on what we saw at White Sands, and then knowing what you had in the uphill phase, knowing that you have a model that can replicate what we saw. Can you predict the downhill? We really just couldn't get there over the last number of weeks.
So this is giving. So he's already said this, but I don't think he said all of this together like he has. So they're talking about the unpredictability and uncertainty in thrusters for whatever reason, especially from the White Sands testing that they did last month or a few weeks ago. They were able to replicate the problem, but it sounds like they were able to replicate it in a bunch of different conditions, or at least the data that they did get back isn't necessarily consistent, and they weren't able to build a model around that data to be able to predict the performance for the actual spacecraft in space. So there's some sort of discontinuity happening, whether it's the testing, like they can't pinpoint the conditions when it does fail because it has maybe a fairly large range of failure conditions. But regardless, they're unable to build the model to then be able to predict when that thruster fails. And that is ultimately, as we heard from Ken Bowersox earlier, this guy right here off to the left, he was coming out and saying that it was primarily that data that they got from White Sands that ultimately led to the decision we got today for Starliner or I guess technically this was yesterday, for Starliner to come back uncrewed. So pretty good summary, wrapping all of that together. Let's see if there's anything else here. But interesting, that starboard thrust house, that doghouse that we were looking at earlier, right? So this guy. So when he says doghouse, he's talking about this, right? This is what he's talking about, the doghouse. It's this big structural component on the side of the Boeing capsule, on the Starliner capsule, that houses all of the different thrusters. Each one of these openings here, each one of these little thrust chambers is a thruster. You have 3 large OMAC thrusters, orbital maneuvering and attitude control thrusters at the bottom, with 2 attitude control thrusters right next to them. So there's obviously some heat soak going through somewhere, but for whatever reason, it's only on the starboard side that's more critical than the other, and there are 4 of them. There are 4 of these doghouse thruster blocks around Starliner, so it's only the starboard one for whatever reason, and that is definitely concerning in terms of like why is that one? You would arguably feel better if you saw consistency across all of the doghouses. Yes, that would mean that more were technically failing or in trouble, but the fact that you have one that's wrong is such an anomaly. Interesting. Just got here, so probably missed it, but they did try turning it off and back on again. Yeah, yes, they did multiple times, both in space and on the ground. Didn't work. The whole turn off, turn on thing. Yeah, recycling did not work.
Also, how close we were to a cliff. In other words, we've damaged the Teflon on some thrusters. So when
during
we
the White
start to
Sands
fire them
testing,
again, will that damage repeat or get back to a point where now the
things
thrusters are at the levels we saw on the docking day very quickly? And then really it's the consequences of failure. When we started thinking about the kind of failures we might get, we had those on docking day, and those were
God, it's so complex,
even though we were
chat.
200 meters from station, it's a very benign environment. This sequence, when the deorbit burn has to execute and then you get into the subsequence, it's a very rapid sequence from the completion of the burn to then getting into the separation a number of minutes later, and there's no real time to reconfigure. So when we laid it all out, that's where the preponderance of the risk was to not put a crew on the vehicle.
Our next question is from Manisha Ravisetti from Space.com.
Wait. Just to, what did he say?
It's a very rapid sequence. Burn has to execute, and then you get into the subsequence. It's a very rapid sequence from the completion of the burn to then getting into the separation a number of minutes later, and there's no real time to reconfigure. So when we laid it all out, that's where the preponderance of the risk was to not put a crew on the vehicle.
So is he saying that they were looking at still doing the separation modification, but with crew on board? So they were, is that what I just heard him say? Because they were talking about, right, one of the modifications they're doing with the flight software on Starliner is they're having the undocking sequence, they're modifying it to be faster. And earlier they said it was supposed to be faster than if it was with crew. And so then tying that into what we heard from him earlier in the summary is that it's because, actually I think Ken Bowersock said it, it's because, or at least it sounds like it's because they are not sure how long the thrusters are going to be online for, because the more you use the thrusters, the heat goes up in the doghouses and the more they tend to fail, right? So they're trying to do this undocking sequence faster to make sure they don't lose thrusters in the process during coast periods. But it sounds like that wasn't just a modification to occur after choosing to put crew on Crew 9 versus Starliner, that they actually looked at doing that modification even with Butch and Sunny on board. It's not really, I guess, a big deal, but it is a little, it throws a wrench in the process. Or at least it gives us a little bit more understanding. So they were actually looking at that as a contingency, and maybe that risk involved was something that even put them over the edge.
Cool.
Our next question is from Manisha Ravisetti from Space.com.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. I think my question is mostly for Dana. I was wondering, what are some of the challenges that you faced in accommodating this delay with ISS operations? I would guess that there are maybe changes you had to make with food allocation or other supplies and task division. And then relatedly, you mentioned that even with this 2025 planned return date, it is the trip is within the scope of what you're comfortable with, for astronauts traveling to the ISS. So what do you think would have been too long for this day, and the point at which we should be, I guess, worried about the fact that they're still up there? Thank you.
So basically boiling that long question down is, what sort of challenges are there for extending their stay in terms of usable resources and things like that? And then two, what would be considered too long for them to be up there on the ISS, right? Because they extended their stay from 8 days to 8 months. But as we heard earlier, that missions for NASA typically are 6 months and have lasted for more than a year. So 8 months is still fine for NASA being able to handle that for astronaut time. I think in general, she's going to say that there's always challenges with changing your operations right away from your original plan, but it's not like there's going to be a food shortage, especially with a 2 cargo systems coming up within the next month. We have another crew. No, I'm sorry. We have 1 crew Soyuz coming up, which will also bring some cargo up with them, and then we actually have an entire cargo Dragon coming up in September, I believe September, right, as well. So I think we have 2 missions in September that could be used to carry up some extra resources. So, even there's no real issue on that front.
Thank you.
Let's see, for the first part of your question, just at a high level from a programmatic standpoint, we protect for about 4 months of what we call consumables reserves, so food, water, different kinds of consumables we have on board. Those are the 2 biggies. 4 months for 4 crew is what we protect for. So we always stay above that amount. And we do that intentionally so that if we had a problem with the delivery, a cargo flight that didn't make it, for example, we'd have margin. So we always have a little more than what we need for some period of time.
I am a little surprised it's only
not
4
limitless.
months. But
in this particular case, we did have a resupply mission. In fact, just a few weeks ago, the Northrop Grumman 21 flight came up, so we had our eye on that flight. And so once we realized the team was working through issues and we were likely to have Butch and Sunny on board, we changed that flight's manifest. So we added more supplies to keep us above that reserve level. We've also got the SpaceX 31 cargo flight.
What'd I say?
Coming up around the corner, so we've got extra supplies on that. And so we've been able to modify and adjust our cargo mission supplies to accommodate the extra mouths we're feeding. No one has had to go on a diet or calorie restrictions. So we haven't had any limitations there. In terms of duration on board, you ask an interesting question. One of the things as an agency that's really important for us is to understand the impacts of long duration space flight on the crew. And so far our experience base and that of the cosmonaut experience base is up to about 12 months, give or take. And so we understand very well performance implications and what it looks like for operations and crew health there. So you're asking the question about how long is too long. I don't think we as an agency know the answer to that. We can tell you that we understand what 12 months does. We're interested in that from Moon to Mars. And those are some of our research objectives and what we're trying to learn in the microgravity environment, but no specific concerns with 8 months or even up to a year. And so far, our data suggests that as long as we've got the right mitigations on board, exercise, the crew spends about 2.5 hours a day with cardio and weightlifting, and as long as we can keep them in shape with rigorous routines, et cetera, we've done a pretty good job keeping the crew's health up with long duration stay.
Next question is from Tim Fernholtz from Payload Space.
Thank you for taking my question this morning. I was just curious if you have any thoughts now on what might have been done to avoid this scenario after OFT-2.
Yes,
if more
thank
attention should have
you.
been paid to redesigning the propulsion system, or if there were decisions that should have been made during the test campaign to avoid the scenario.
Thank you. Somebody asked it. Payload, you go.
Yeah, I'll take the question. I think if we look back at OFT-2 now with this newer lens of what we learned at White Sands, certainly could we have explored OFT-2 in a little more detail, either leading to some redesign of the doghouse to get the thermal environment lower or operate the thrusters differently. I think it's easy to do that in hindsight. If we went back and thought about the whole integrated problem a little bit more, could we have done some kind of testing? What I would say.
Please tell me you're going to follow up with why. why weren't these tests and things? You had 2 years, right? OFT-2 was back in 2022, and now it's 2024, and we're flying the next demonstration mission with crew on board. So in the 2 years, if we saw these problems, why wasn't there these white sand tests and things like that?
I'd say is it's very difficult to test the doghouse environment on the ground. You've got thrusters that fire in multiple directions, and it's very hard on the ground to have a test facility, a vacuum chamber that accommodates thruster firings in multiple directions. So
sure,
and then get the thermal right in that doghouse and keep the thermal up. So
but how are you doing it now?
There's no easy way to do that test on the ground. We thought obviously we had done enough analysis to show that the thrusters would be within the temperatures that they were qualified for.
Okay.
Clearly, there were some misses back in qualification.
Okay.
We're going to go through that data in more detail post-flight and then figure out what we can do to go fix them. And then we'll also look at our process. I would say we're going to look at the certification process. I know Boeing's looking at their process as well on how they got here. We're doing the same thing on the NASA side.
So was it only one thruster on the OFT-2 mission that failed? Or did they give a number of how many failed in 2022? I'd have to go back in the VOD and see, because I don't remember where it was. But if anybody remembers, was it just one that he mentioned failed? Because if it's just one, then I can kind of see, right? They're not seeing the entire doghouse thermal problem they are now. But still, if they saw more than one, which to my understanding, I thought it was more than one thruster having problems on OFT-2, then I would think that would have called for a more thorough investigation, kind of like what they're doing now at White Sands. But anyways, like, okay, I guess that partially answered what I was talking about as to why they may have not done such a thorough analysis and tests like they are now. Like if it was only one, I can kind of see that, because you do your analysis and you're like, well, you know, this was kind of a fluke, or, you know, this happened because we fired at this point. And so, you know, there could have been a different explanation for it that they accounted for. But clearly, clearly now in hindsight, hindsight being 2020 vision and all that, that was a worse problem.
Next question is from Sawyer Rosenstein from NASASpaceflight.com.
Hey, NASA Spaceflight.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question.
Is that Sawyer?
Next question is from Sawyer Rosenstein from NASASpaceflight.com.
From NSF.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. Earlier you mentioned that there would be a simplified undocking procedure. Can you kind of explain what that means, of what this undocking would be like compared to, say, with crew?
Awesome
and what
question.
the contingency would be if there is an issue at some point with that undocking and burn away from the station?
Great question. That's what we were asking.
I can answer the question. So normally we would back away from the space station, essentially go out in front.
Okay, real quick. I'm sorry I interrupted the answer, but I do want to say, will he mention the reason why they're doing this docking procedure being a reason for, or being the reason that the thrusters could go offline, and that's what they're worried about? That's what I want to know. Is he going to give us that little nugget of information as well? All right, here we go.
Yeah, I can answer the question. So normally we would back away from the space station, essentially go out in front and then above the space station, and then eventually end up below the space station and then on a trajectory that
a walking safety ellipse.
In front of the space
it's known
station.
as a walking safety ellipse.
Normal plan to undock, heading into the flight, before the flight. Now what we're going to do is execute a small number. The undocking itself with the NASA docking system will be exactly the same. We'll use the same techniques. The software will command undocking. We'll drive a sequence of hooks. They'll open up after we've depressurized that area in between the vehicles, and then we'll undock. And there's some springs that push the vehicle away. What we'll do is we'll go through a SEP sequence that puts us on, I would say, what's called a posigrade trajectory. And so we'll end up going, essentially phasing out behind the space station to a safe distance, and then we'll get away from the space station, execute the deorbit burn. So we've used that kind of SEP sequence in the past in other vehicles. We've tested this SEP sequence. It is already in the software. It's one of the breakout sequences that are already in the software. And so what we'll do is just go command that sequence early and use that to get away more quickly. And so it's pretty simple, pretty elegant. It was a great idea by the Boeing team.
Okay, and Boeing came up with that.
Our next question is from David Curley from
That's
Full
a good
Throttle.
little tidbit of info.
Thank you very much. Steve Stitch and Bauer Sox. I think I heard Stitch say that White Sands testing was kind of the turning point for you, and I thought Bauer Sox kind of went in a little different direction there. And it seems to me that Boeing and NASA drew different conclusions from those tests, NASA believing that there were potential for losing some of the thrusters. Boeing said at the time that they got pretty close to root cause and were probably within reasonable risk to use them. So did you get to two different conclusions? And was it actually the key factor, the White Sands test, that led to this decision today? And did I hear that you're not ruling out the potential of a four-person crew for a next Starliner flight?
So let me start with the first question. I think Steve was talking about how we process the data. I was talking about being encouraged by the fact that we had new data. Anytime you have new data, it means that you can analyze it and find out that things are proceeding well, and you can converge the team with that new data.
Mm-hmm.
What Steve found was maybe a little bit different, and that's why it probably sounded different how we reacted.
Yeah, I would say at White Sands we were excited, and that was really a turning point in that we were able to replicate the loss of thrust. We simulated the uphill profile, in other words, how the thrusters fired from the launch sequence into on orbit all the way to docking.
Oh, so they recreated the mission.
Uphill sequences, and then we did a number of downhills. And so we were encouraged when we saw that we could actually see thrust degradation in those downhill runs. What then was new is once we took the thruster apart and we looked at the valve on the oxidizer side, we saw this swelling.
So it is the oxidizer side, like I said.
Seat, which when we talked to the vendor, Aerojet Rocketdyne, they had never seen this before in this particular thruster. And so I think that's where
two thrusters had issues on OFT2. Okay, so more than one. So I feel like that warranted an investigation, and clearly they said that he did do an analysis, so that's good. Clearly not as in-depth as one is needed. My question on this one here is they say they have never seen this issue before. Now, I do wonder, like, just because it's the same thruster block or like same thruster design as what was on the space shuttle, and that's something, again, I want to make sure, I don't know that for sure. I would love clarification on that front. I'm pretty sure that these thrusters that are in the OMAC system, the orbital maneuvering and attitude control system, are at least derivatives or essentially the same thruster design as what was on the space shuttle. That is my understanding. I would love to confirm that. Because if that is the case, now whether or not these are the same or different valves that were on the space shuttle, I'm probably they're different valves than what were on the space shuttle in terms of the manufacturer. But if they are the same as the space shuttle thruster designs, the space shuttle had numerous issues with, quote, Teflon seals in their RCS thrusters, particularly on the oxidizer side, funny enough. Again, different vehicle, could be different root cause, different problems, but still ultimately the same effect. So it just, I don't know. I don't know, chat. To just say that you'd never seen this before. I don't know where the discontinuity comes from, because there are 3 papers, 2 NASA technical reports and an old AIAA paper, if I'm not mistaken, talking specifically about the thruster problems on the poppet valve or poppet Teflon valve seals from the space shuttle RCS. So I would love clarification on those fronts.
There was a change in the wrist posture. Initially, we were somewhat excited by replicating the damage, or the degradation in the thrust, but then when we looked a little more closely, we saw this swelling on the Teflon, and then that gave us a whole new idea of the physics involved.
Not sure,
in the
Toaster.
failure mode.
Not what I'm referring to.
And then that led us to study that failure mode a lot more in the last few weeks. And then that gave us a whole new idea of the physics involved in the failure mode. And then that led us to study that failure mode a lot more in the last few weeks. Relative to the 4-person Starliner crew, we haven't really had those discussions yet. We need to get the vehicle back. We need to work through our sequence of events on what changes we'll make, both for the helium leaks and the thrusters, and then we'll make a decision on the next flight. It's a little premature to discuss that.
Yeah.
Next question is from David Denault from About Space Today.
Good afternoon. I'd like to see if we can get a individual consensus across the panel. We've talked about the voting. What about the risk assessment? Was it a 50-50 possibility of coming back? Was it a 75-25 decision or a 90-10 decision that Starliner would be safe?
Well, Starliner still has to come back uncrewed, right? And we believe that Starliner coming back uncrewed, although higher than the risk we'd be willing to take to put crew on it, is a reasonable thing to do to finish the test flight and gather the data that we want to gather. To give you a percentage on polling or how people feel, I think that's pretty tough to do. All I can say for sure is that when we polled today, all the people that we asked from the senior management of the different organizations that are involved with human spaceflight they all concurred that we should have the crew come down on a different vehicle than the current Starliner.
Again, this obsession with wanting to
Our next question is from
quantify
Marvin
the
Marshall from the Space Report News.
opinions.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is for Administrator Nelson. I'm speaking on behalf of millions who share, the same concern. Given that SpaceX operates 4, soon to be 5 Crew Dragons and 3 Cargo Dragons that can resolve anomalies in days or weeks rather than, months or years, all while receiving, a few billion less than Boeing. So we're just, curious, why does NASA continue to support a company, with a history like this? We get the rationale was to have 2 options to ensure, reliability and redundancy, but that's what you get with SpaceX's ability to operate multiple spacecraft, quickly address anomalies, everything they do. So, again, just speaking on behalf of millions, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing?
What is your question?
Why do we continue to fund Boeing? What's the problems when SpaceX?
Is your question, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing?
Yes.
For the obvious reason that, number one, we need 2 spacecraft to have the redundancy in case one is not available to take crew to and from the International Space Station. Number 2, this is according to an arm's length contract, and a contract that is a fixed price contract. And number 3, Boeing has been a great partner for NASA over the years. As a matter of fact, the big space launch system.
I was just about to say, guess what the only working system as part of the Artemis program is? SLS. Guess who builds it? Boeing. I'm not trying to defend Boeing and Starliner here, obviously, but it is kind of funny to
Raiders detected.
Nerduino coming in
stay.
with a raid. What is up, Raiders? Nerduino, how are you doing? Hope you're doing swell. Welcome to the dumpster fire that is our review of NASA's press conference from yesterday, where they gave the ultimate decision to forego returning Butch and Sunny, the 2 Starliner crew flight test astronauts, not returning them back on Starliner. They're going to stay up on station for until February of next year and come back on Dragon. We just got that big load of news here yesterday, and I have to tell you, this was a fantastic press conference, the best one we've had during this entire process for Starliner. We have gotten, even though unfortunately it's been a little spread out with little tidbits of good information throughout the entire hour of question and answers they're doing. I wish they could have just summarized all of this up front, but it's been good. It's been really good. We finally are getting answers to the questions we've had since June 7th or whatever the docking date was for Starliner. The dumpster fire review of the dumpster fire. Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, fantastic information we're getting here. Really, really dig that. But yeah, just kind of funny how, so for those of you just coming in, the question that we just got was from somebody asking, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing? And it just goes to show you that the guy doesn't really understand the whole crew program and why Boeing and SpaceX are in it to begin with. First off, it is a fixed price contract, so Boeing is already allotted for in NASA's budget. If something does go wrong here, Boeing would fit the bill for that, just like they did for the second OFT-1 flight they did, right? They had OFT-1, failed spectacularly in the fact that they did not get to the ISS when they were supposed to get to the ISS in the first place, right? And so because of that spectacular failure and all the things that went wrong on that, Boeing then spent $300 million of their own company out-of-pocket money to send up the Starliner vehicle again on their own dime without NASA paying them for that. So it is a fixed price contract already on the books for Boeing and allotted for Boeing when they complete their milestones, right? A fixed price contract is based on milestone completion. Also, what I was just saying as y'all were coming in is, funny. It's kind of funny, but the whole Artemis program right now, arguably the only thing working right now on schedule, I guess you can say, for the Artemis program is the SLS stage, is the Space Launch System, the massive rocket. And guess who builds it? Boeing. So it's a little funny. Like, he was basically saying Boeing's a horrible company. Why is SpaceX, giving them contracts and stuff? And it's like, well, honestly, Boeing's been good. Just Starliner, for whatever reason, is having massive problems, and that needs to be rectified for sure. Honestly, if I'm Butch and Sunny, I'm breathing a sigh of relief. Yeah, I know, right? Weirdly learned more here than the breathless coverage. Yeah. Where can I report a Q&A murder? So what's kind of funny is also because of this because of this question, rather, Bill Nelson is arguably, or I should say noticeably, a little bit peeved at this question, because he was like, so what's your question? And it's a recording. Unfortunately, well, are these live actually? Or at least this one was, I think, recorded. Other phone calls were live, but, I think other phone call questions were live. But anyways, yeah, he was just like, what are you saying? Why are we funding Boeing? Are you stupid? No, he didn't say that, but it's been good. So let's continue to hear Pudding Man.
SLS rocket is overall managed by Boeing.
This was live?
And there has been a long...
I know the whole press conference is live, but I was thinking that last question was recorded. I could be wrong about that. I know they do take recorded questions sometimes, and they also take live phone call questions sometimes, or most of the time. But I was thinking that one was recorded, but could be wrong on that.
History with Boeing. The fourth reason is that they were the successful bidder, along with SpaceX.
Boeing haven't built a capsule before. No, they haven't.
So for all those reasons, that's why NASA does business with Boeing.
The only reason why I'm thinking that particular question was a recording is because Bill Nelson was responding, asking him to clarify your question, and there was dead silence. There, no response. And I think before, when it's a live phone call, I think it does go both ways, two-way communications, but not sure.
So I'd also like to add, Boeing operates the space station for us as well as the prime contractor for space station, and that's in its 25th year. So
Boeing has a good track record, arguably, with NASA at least.
Yeah, Boeing's
until
been a
Starliner.
Great partner with us on space station, and I think the key word is partner. A lot of people want to focus on the contractual relationship
definitely,
where we're buying something from a company. This isn't completely like that, right? I mean, we have a contract with Boeing, but it's to work together to develop this capability for our country. And we've had two good partners, Boeing and SpaceX, when it comes to commercial crew. And when they have problems, we don't just throw rocks at them or tell them that we don't like them. We work with them to get through those problems.
Our next question is from Jackie Goddard from the Times of London.
Yes, hello, thank you. And just following on from that, can you help us understand why Boeing aren't here and what we're to conclude from that? You used to brief jointly. And whatever the reason may...
I'm not going to lie. I love this question. What was I asking this entire time beforehand? They got more money than SpaceX, though, didn't they? Yeah, Joe, they did. I think SpaceX bid like $2.8 billion and Boeing bid like $4.2 billion or something like that. But yeah. But also don't forget that SpaceX got the crew resupply contract. And so their Dragon 1, being a predecessor to Dragon 2, was arguably partially paid for Dragon 2, right? But yeah, anyways. What did you do? What did you do, Hawk? But anyways, so yeah, as I was saying, I'm glad somebody asked this question because, quite frankly, I've been wanting to know. Yeah, it might be a little bit curt, and there might be an obvious reason that why Boeing is not here, but I want to hear their answers.
Maybe. Was there any discussion around what their absence might communicate to the public? Boeing has been adamant that Starliner is safe. You folks aren't there. We hear that the legacies of
Me too, nerd.
Challenger
Me too.
and Columbia have helped to guide your caution at NASA. So how concerned should the public be at the implication that that learning curve at Boeing possibly differs? Thank you.
Well, I'll take the first part, and it looks like Jim's getting ready to take the second part. But the reason Boeing's not here is it was a NASA decision today, crewed, uncrewed. That was the focus of this review.
I don't like that answer.
And so we thought it was reasonable to have just NASA on this panel. Jim, anything you want to add?
I think that's correct, Ken. And then I'd add, I think Ken and Steve have characterized that Boeing was part of the decision process. They've characterized what Boeing's position was. So and we're here to communicate the overall NASA position.
Yeah. So we kind of got a little bit of that earlier when somebody asked a slightly different question and they kind of said that. I still don't think that's a very good answer. Like, just because it was a NASA decision, it's Boeing's vehicle, and the technical specifications and questions probably could have been answered arguably better with the people involved, or with, the representative involved with Boeing. Now, I understand. I think the more likely reason is because the Boeing representative or representatives would be absolutely bombarded by every media outlet ever in this Q&A. Just absolutely attacked about, like, why is this happening? Who are you? Why are you doing this? I think that's probably the actual reason for it. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of I know NASA can't say that, but I feel like what they said a little weak. Like, just because it's NASA's decision, it would be great to hear Boeing's side and what they actually did as part of this whole process that we keep hearing from a very high level from these NASA folks, right? Like, we've heard out throughout the entire thing, oh, thank you for Boeing for putting in all of your hard work and them conducting this analysis. It would have been great to hear from Boeing to actually get more information about what analysis was conducted. But hey, that's just me, I guess.
Next question is from Natalie LaRoche from the Boston Globe.
Hi there.
Yep,
Thank
exactly,
you so much,
Nick.
everyone,
For sure.
for the answers to your questions. It was mentioned earlier that their families are their pillars of strength right now. I was just wondering how apprised their families are in this whole process, and if you could describe what their spirits are during these times.
Already asked and answered.
Okay, I think if I heard your question right,
they already said it was fine.
And they anticipate.
Basically, somebody asked this question, almost exact same question earlier about the whole family thing. Essentially, the answer boils down to it's in Sonny and Butch's job description. They kind of knew the risks and things that could happen out of this, so they're also in space, which could be a arguable positive for them. But anyways, and then from the family side, arguably, I hope that they understand NASA's decision here to keep their mom and dad, their family members in space safe. So, like, it's also in the astronaut job description, so the family should know that this could possibly happen. So it's been asked and answered.
So you have to families, and we thank them for.
The last question will be from Bill Harwood from CBS News.
Yeah, thank you very much. A question for Senator Nelson, if I can. All my technical questions were answered, so I have a political question for you. There's been a lot of talk during the past few weeks that we live in an environment today where one presidential candidate is the chairman of the National Space Council, and we live in an environment where criticism is thrown about. I don't know what word to even use for it. The question is this: is there, in your mind anyway, did politics and the ramifications of this decision, if it didn't go well, play any role at all in your decision, your personal decision, Senator, about how to proceed with this? Was politics even?
I don't even want to listen. I don't even want to listen to the answer or the rest of the question. Politics should at least have no regard for human life when it comes to space. Politics should end at the Kármán line. There should be no politics involved within spaceflight, because that's how people die, as we have seen in the past. particularly within organizational politics. So no, you damn well better say, Administrator Nelson, that absolutely not was that even a consideration.
In the back of your mind when you guys were talking about all this.
Bill, if anyone knows, you know that NASA is not only bipartisan, it is nonpartisan. And that's the way we've tried to operate this agency.
I need that on a shirt.
What
part?
I can tell you unequivocally, from a personal standpoint, that politics has not played any part in this decision.
Yeah.
What I said earlier about Challenger and Columbia and the lessons learned and what we've tried to change in a culture in order that safety is our North Star is what we are trying to do in a very hostile environment in which if you make a mistake, it's very unforgiving. So I can tell you unequivocally, I have seen some speculation in the press that because we are in an election season, that decisions may have been made with regard to.
You kind of bring up a good point there, the way. Yeah, I guess it is good for the public. You know, I do try to always live by that there is no stupid question, but I do hate hearing that kind of question, because it's just like, no, when lives are on the line in space flight, you better hope that politics aren't in it. Like, what? But you bring up an excellent point. I'm not going to lie, that to be fair, the question is a good one for the public to hear. That is true. Especially if the media was perpetuating this possibility of politics being involved. Ugh.
This
Gross.
Announced today with regard to an election absolutely has nothing to do with it. And as long as I'm around here, it's not going to.
Thank you, Administrator, and thank you to all of our panelists
Says a
today.
former senator.
Thank you all for joining
Kappa.
us. Stay tuned for more information on NASA's commercial.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about that, chat? So yeah, like I said, that was Boeing's crew flight test status press conference that was hosted yesterday at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Overall, that was the best Starliner press conference we've had since the flight started in June 5th. Like, fantastic. We got tons of, like, if you were listening carefully, I tried to point it out as much as I could. We got tons of really, really good information. A lot of questions finally answered. Everything from, yes, Butch and Sunny actually will have spacesuits going down on the Crew 9 Dragon capsule. They're flying one spacesuit up, and there's actually already one spacesuit on board the ISS that one of them can use. So they will be flying down in spacesuits, because that was a question from the previous press conference that we got almost no information on, and it was like, yeah, those spacesuits are incompatible. So it's good that we got that resolved. Fantastic to learn the actual tests that were conducted out of White Sands. Basically recreated the entire mission twice at least during the entire mission profile going up, and they were actually able to recreate the problems that they're seeing in space on the ground. That's huge. That's fantastic. Also, probably the detriment for Starliner in this scenario, because they saw on the what they were calling uphill and downhill. Uphill meaning going up to the ISS, they recreated the problems, and then when they were coming back from the ISS, they saw those same problems, and that would be with crew on board in space. So that was probably the detriment, that they saw the same problems then reoccurring again after what would be separation from the ISS. Great information that we did get confirmation that they actually saw this problem, whether it's the same problem or not, it's the same effect that we saw thrust degradation on OFT2 back in 2022, because there were some questions about that we got that like little bit of information out, and then it just like went bye-bye. It just like went into the ethos We did get that confirmation that NASA and Boeing did see this thruster problem happen on OFT2 back 2 years ago. Question still remains as to why a more thorough investigation wasn't done, but arguably they satisfied that question as well. Yeah, really, really good press conference, in my opinion, chat. Got through a lot. Some good information regarding what the return sequence will be like for Starliner. They're actually changing the trajectory design for its return home from undocking from the ISS. So we'll be going through a faster, basically separation from the ISS than what they would have done with crew on board. Arguably, from some information we got from Ken Bowersox there, is that they're doing that faster separation or departure in order to hopefully keep thrusters online longer, so that way they can actually get away from the ISS while they still have working thrusters, because apparently it's actually a concern that those thrusters might fail during departure, which is interesting. Also understand the overall problem is very, very prevalent in the starboard only thruster block or doghouse. No, so they have multiple thruster blocks, right? 4 doghouses with thrusters in them. We showed this earlier. This is what a thruster block, or what they call a doghouse, looks like. You can see the very tight space and the very close proximity of all these different thrusters. And so they're getting heat soak in between thrusters, but for whatever reason, the starboard doghouse is the one that is most prevalent in that heating. So that's certainly a concern, because you would think that if every doghouse is essentially the same, that you would see the same heating throughout all of them. That would at least be a consistent design issue. But for whatever reason, they're seeing a problem in the starboard doghouse more than the others. So that's worrisome. Yeah, a lot of really good information. They have rules about levels of risk in certain zones around the space station. They would absolutely want to get it out of there as fast as can. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There was one other thing. Oh yeah, and the information regarding the decision-making process itself was also outlined pretty well throughout this press conference in general. So they said that they basically polled every major head, manager, director from all the different NASA departments and internal organizations. And there was a unanimous decision, their words, unanimous decision to return Butch and Sunny home on the Crew 9 Dragon capsule and not Starliner for safety issues or for safety reasons. And that even though Boeing says that they were confident in Starliner to return Butch and Sunny home, there is a very clear distinction that should be made that, yes, your risk assessment is a quantitative process, or a quantitative result, but it's kind of a qualitative process. And I tried to outline that to some degree here on stream. There are, of course, different ways to do it, but the simplest form of a risk assessment is you have engineers or experts or whatever list all of the different types of risks that could ever possibly be a problem, and then you give it a score, 1 through 5, for the likelihood of that risk occurring, and then the consequence of that risk occurring. And then you can either add the 2 results together or multiply them or what have you, right? And as the example, if one of the risks was, Starliner impacting the station from thruster failure, maybe Boeing saw that as, yes, a very critical consequence, but a very unlikely occurrence, right? Versus NASA, probably being more conservative, saw that as being, yes, a very catastrophic consequence, but also not just an unlikely occurrence, perhaps more likely to happen than what Boeing scored it. So that would be the reason why Boeing seems to have a dissenting opinion from NASA. But at the end of the day, it all just comes down to what perceived risk is. But anyways, let me re-ask the question. Did the info about the thruster release in 2022, or are they just hearing about it now? I don't know. That would be a good question to get confirmed, Element. All we got today is that, yes, that thruster issue was seen before. And I believe we heard that on a previous press conference. I don't know if it was really made to be a big deal after OFT2. So, yeah. They replicated the issues on the ground only after the issue appeared in this mission. Yeah, Yeah, so it sounds like NASA and Boeing saw this thruster issue, and they did conduct an analysis and investigation as to why those thrusters failed. And the simulation results, they didn't do as big of an investigation as they're clearly doing now, like a full workup of the entire mission analysis. They did like simulation and other things like that, and they, I guess, attributed their failure to some cause, and that cause was maybe mitigated somehow, right? Like maybe they attributed it to being too much in direct sunlight, or maybe too fast of a thruster firing, and so they wrote it off as that, maybe changed some software to try to mitigate that, but that wasn't the actual problem, essentially, right? Like they attributed the actual cause to a different effect. That's kind of what it sounds like anyways. What's up, Costies? How are you? But upon further investigation, they're seeing a much bigger issue at play here. But anyways, chat, that is going to wrap up our Go No Go poll tonight, our space news segment. Really appreciate everyone hanging out. I hope you guys enjoyed that really in-depth review of Starliner. Watching that press conference and my commentary, I hope, was beneficial. But that is going to wrap up our space news. So a lot to happen, or a lot has happened. Don't forget, chat, before I go though, that we do have Polaris Dawn currently slated for early Tuesday morning Eastern Daylight Time. That'll be at 3:38 Tuesday morning Eastern Daylight Time. So be wary for that. SpaceX crew capsule going up for a heck of a mission, chat. We covered that at the very beginning of stream in our Go News right there. But we must bring it into a close. Let's bring it into a close, chat, because it's late. It's 11:33. I got work in the morning. This was kind of an impromptu, unscheduled stream because I wanted to cover this big news before the start of the week. But that's it, chat. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream and all that jazz. Next stream should be tomorrow, starting at around 7 Mountain, and we'll either get into more space news if more stuff drops, or might even prolong the start of the stream to coincide with Polaris Dawn. We'll see. I do want to cover that, but it's also really late and I have work. But we'll see. Anyways, I'm out, chat. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you here tomorrow.